Settle back now. Allow your body to grow heavy against the mattress, the pillows soft behind your head. Imagine the world outside your window fading into stillness, the street noises dim, the air cooling, the weight of the day slowly lifting from your shoulders. As you listen, picture yourself stepping into a time far behind us, into the dimly lit world of the Middle Ages. In this quiet vision, a lantern flickers inside a stone chamber. Its golden light dances gently across uneven walls, casting long shadows that stretch and sway like slow tides. Thea smells faintly of beeswax, of wood smoke drifting in from a distant hearth, of old parchment resting in stacks upon sturdy wooden shelves. Outside, the narrow street is hushed. Mist drifts lazily through the arches, curling along cobblestones, while from somewhere not far away, the steady trickle of a river turns the wheel of a hum. It is night, yet the world is not asleep, simply breathes slower. Within these walls sits the scriptorium, the sacred writing room of the scribes. Here, silence is both discipline and comfort. The only sound is the faint, rhythmic scratching of quills gliding across parchment. It is not hurried, not careless, but steady, each letter shaped with intention, each line stretched neatly across the page. The scribes lean close, candles glowing near their hands, eyes focused with unwavering patience. Their task is not simply writing, it is preserving memory, giving form to words that must endure through centuries. Yet in this tranquility lies a subtle tension. Parchment is precious, crafted from carefully treated animal skins, smooth yet unforgiving. Ink is delicate, often unpredictable, made from oak galls and iron salts that stain deeply, sometimes unevenly. Hours of steady work can be undone in a heartbeater. Hand slips, a blot falls, a line bends where it should remain straight. To us, a mistake may seem small, a simple thing to cross out or ignore. But to the medieval scribe, each error was heavy dotted, meant not only wasted parchment, which was costly, but wasted time, wasted labor, and a quiet sense of shame. Their fear was not punishment by rulers or harsh scolding, but the quieter dread of disappointing their order, their teacher, or perhaps themselves. Still, in the stillness of these chambers, there is peace. The fear of mistakes is balanced by the rhythm of devotion. Copying texts was an act of patience, of humility, of offering one's hands to serve something greater. In monasteries, the tolling of bells marked the hours, guiding the day into patterns of prayer and labor. A scribe might pause to warm chilled fingers by a small brazier, or to rest weary by glancing out at the cloister garden, where winter frost clung to branches or spring flowers opened shyly toward the sun. Imagine walking into such a room. The benches are long, the desks angled just enough to hold a manuscript open. Small knives rest nearby, not as weapons but as tools to scrape away mistakes, to sharpen quills, to smooth parchment edges. The smell of ink is sharp, almost metallic, yet comforting in its familiarity. Light filters through high, narrow windows, softened by the thickness of the stone. Everything feels slower, more deliberate, and so, as we drift into their world tonight, we will not focus on hardship or punishment. Instead, we will follow the gentler rhythms of their days. We will hear the bells at dawn, see the pale light slip into cloisters, watch the candle flames flicker as the day deepens into evening. We will pause by the riverside, where monks sometimes wash their hands before returning to work. We will listen to the distant murmur of prayers echoing faintly through stone corridors. This story is not one of rulers or battles. It is not of crowns, swords, or victories. It is of quiet lives lived in devotion to something most of us take for granted: the preservation of words. Without the patience of these scribes, without their long hours bent over parchment, so many voices from the past would have faded into silence. The philosophers, poets, healers, and storyteller shows words survived owe their endurance to these hidden hands. So, let your breath, slow as theirs once did, steady and calm. Imagine the weight of a quill between your fingers, the smooth resistance of parchment beneath your hand, the golden glow of lantern light around you. Feel the hush of the scriptorium settling like a blanket over your mind. Outside, the mist drifts, the river flows, the stars appear above the cloister roof. Inside, the quill scratches softly on. This is the world we will wander through together. Gentle steps into the lives of medieval scribes. Each chapter will open a new window. The calm of their mornings, the order of their tools, the rhythm of their bells, the stillness of their nights. Nothing hurried, nothing harsh, only the soft unfolding of daily life. The forgotten details that remind us that history is made not only by kings and warriors, but by the quiet resilience of ordinary hands. And as you drift deeper into this story, let the calmness of their devotion carry you. Let the fears that pressed upon them dissolve into patience, just as your own worries of today may now dissolve into rest. For tonight, history is not a tale of struggles and storms, it is a lullaby, written in ink, courageously across the centuries, and offered now, softly, to you. The day began with quiet ritual, as pale sunlight drifted through the narrow cloister windows and touched Thackel stone walls with a soft glow that seemed older than time itself. A light that carried with it not only the beginning of another day, but also the weight of centuries of tradition and devotion. For inside these walls, where silence ruled and time slowed to the pace of patient hands and careful breaths, the life of a medieval scribe unfolded in rhythms as steady as the tolling of monastery bells. The air was cool, holding faint scents of beeswax candles, old parchment, damp stone floors, and a lingering echo of incense from early prayers. While outside, the world stretched slowly awake, birds fluttering into morning flight, dew clinging to grass, and the faint trickle of a river turning the wheel of a nearby mill. Yet here, in the scriptorium, everything seemed hushed, as if the walls themselves wished to protect the fragile concentration that turned blank pages into vessels of memory. A single scribe rose early, his movements unhurried but purposeful, first bowing his head in prayer at the chapel, where the quiet murmur of voices blended into the stillness of dawn, then making his way to the workbench that Warspeth, his labor and his calling, the wooden desk smoothed by years of touch, worn edges showing the patience of countless hours, the surface carefully arranged with tools he knew as intimately as his own breath, his freshly cut quill, sharpened to a fine point that could trace letters with elegant precision, a parchment sheet smoothed with pumice so that its surface would welcome ink, a small pot of dark ink carefully prepared for the long hours ahead, thick, deep, and capable of staining a page with permanence, alongside a knife to trim the quill when its edge dulled, a cloth for blotting mistakes that he prayed would not come, and small marks of guidance drawn faintly to keep lines straight. For to the medieval scribe, order was not simply habit but discipline, a devotion to clarity and beauty that mirrored the order of faith and creation itself. Wooden benches creaked softly as others settled into their places, each man immersed in his own world of letters, their faces calm, their bodies still, their breaths steady, as though each were a vessel emptied of all distraction, filled only with the duty of words. Morning was the most precious time, when hands were steady, minds clear, and eyes rested from the night's darkness, when parchment seemed brightest and mistakes felt furthest away, hidden by the freshness of light and the quiet hope of a new day. For here, every page begun carried not only the promise of progress, but also the shadow of fear, the knowledge that one misplaced stroke, one blot of ink, one slip of the hand could undo hours of labor, waste precious parchment, and stain a page meant to carry sacred words or cherished wisdom. Yet in these early hours, the fear softened, pushed back by ritual, by order, by the comfort of beginning again. The scriptorium itself, though plain, glowed with calm purpose. Stone walls bare save for narrow windows, where light fell in strips, floors cool and echoing, long tables aligned like silent altars to the written word, and rows of shelves where completed manuscripts lay in their bindings of wood and leather, treasures of knowledge that had passed through hands like his, each one representing not just words copied but hours of discipline, prayer, patience, and quiet sacrifice. For the scribe was more than a worker, he was a guardian of memory, a bridge between past and future, preserving words that might otherwise be lost to time, and in his careful strokes lay the hope that wisdom would survive. Still, beneath that noble duty rested the heavy awareness of human frailty. Erred, that one small mistake could ripple through eternity, that an error in a sacred text might alter meaning, might corrupt the truth, might bring shame upon the hand that wrote it. And so the scribe breathed slowly, steadily, guiding each movement with care, his quill dipping gently into ink, his hand gliding across parchmentine steady arcs and lines, letters forming like tiny sculptures, precise, balanced, each one a testament to focus. Around him, the soft chorus of quills filled the room, a sound like rain falling on leaves, gentle, rhythmic, almost musical, blending with the distant toll of bells, marking the hour and the faint shuffle of sandals on Stoner's brothers passed quietly through the cloister outside. Time in the scriptorium did not rush. It flowed like a river slowed by stones. Steady, patient, unyielding, and within that flow, the scribe felt both safety and weight. A strange comfort in knowing that his task today was the same as yesterday, and would be the same tomorrow. The copying of words, the shaping of letters, the repetition that built not boredom but devotion. He paused sometimes, not to rest, but to breathe, to let the silence press around him, to let the faint light from the window guide his eye, to remind himself that his work was not simply for himself, but for generations he would never know, for a future where his name might be forgotten, yet his letters would remain, holding stories, prayers, knowledge. And in those pauses he felt both small and infinite, a single man bound by discipline yet tied to eternity through ink and parchment. Outside, the day brightened, but within, the scriptorium remained steady in its dim glow, as if insulated from the rush of time, a place where dawn stretched long and slow, holding the scribes in its embrace. And so the morning passed, each stroke carrying the dual weight of hope and fear, until Scribe leaned back for a moment, flexing stiff fingers, gazing at the page before him where neat lines of text flowed, black ink standing sharp against pale parchment, a quiet victory that no one applauded, no one attested, yet one that filled him with a calm pride, for in the quiet labor of writing, he felt the pulse of something greater, something enduring, something that would live beyond him. And as the bells tolled again, marking the next hour, he bowed his head once more, whispered a prayer for steady hands, and returned to the page, quill in hand, ink flowing, silence surrounding, the day still only beginning, the fear of mistakes still lingering, but softened now into the rhythm of work, the rhythm of dawn, the rhythm of the scriptorium that held him like a cradle of stone, patient and eternal, carrying him into another day of words. To hold a sheet of parchment was to hold more than just a surface for words. It was to cradle within one's hands silent story of time, of craft, of animals, of patient labor, and of devotion that stretched from the hidden workshops of parchment makers to the hushed scriptorium where scribes bent low over their desks in steady concentration. And so each sheet, smooth and pale under lamplight, carried with it not just cost, but dignity. For parchment was not made quickly, nor cheaply, nor without toil, but through weeks of transformation, where their skin of calf, or sheep, or goat was carefully soaked in lime water to loosen its hair, scraped clean with curved nibs until the flesh was bare, then stretched across wooden frames, where it dried under steady tension, pulled tighter and tighter until it grew both thin and strong, a surface at once delicate and enduring. And when the work was done, the skin bore faint memories of its origin, teeny pores, subtle veins, ripples of grains that reminded all woe touched it that parchment was once alive, and this life lent gravity to the act of writing upon it, for when a scribe set his quill upon such a page, he was not merely placing ink upon blankness, but inscribing thought up in something that had already lived, already borne breath, already carried its own silent history into the world. And this knowledge filled his work with reverence, for mistakes upon parchment could not be erased easily. A blot of ink might spread like a wound, a crooked letter might scar the surface, and though scraping with pumice or their careful use of a knife could sometimes lighten an error, the trace of it almost always remained, a faint shadow, a reminder of imperfection, and thus the fear of mistakes weighed heavily on the scribe's hand, pressing invisibly into each stroke. For to ruin parchment was to waste not only hours of his own labor, but also the many days often seen hands who had prepared it. The parchment maker with his vats of lime and his scraping blades, the tanner who supplied skins, the shepherd who tended animals whose lives had ended, each part of the chain echoing insolence behind the scribe's desk. And so when the scribe lifted a sheet and placed it before him, he often paused, feeling its faint coolness, noticing how it caught the candlelight, sensing how its cream expansimetto glow softly, awaiting the slow emergence of words. And in that pause was a prayer of sorts, unspoken but felt, a recognition that what he held was not to be wasted, not to be taken lightly, but to be honored with care. For parchment was precious not only in cost but in meaning, a vessel that promised endurance, for ink on parchment unlike ink on papyrus or paper, could last centuries, even millennia, surviving damp and fire and war, carrying human thought farther than the life of any one man. And so, in the mind of the scribe, each page was already both fragile and eternal, its present vulnerable, its future enduring. And this paradox gave his labor its quiet intensity, its mixture of fear and reverence, of fragility and strength. And within this balance, the life of a scribe unfolded, morning after morning, sheet after sheet, quill stroke after quill stroke, each moment drawn out like the soft toll-off bells that measured his hours, reminding him of time's passage, of mortality, of the duty to leave no careless mark. And so when he wrote, he slowed himself, steadying his breath, steadying his hand, and each letter seamless like a mark of ink, then a carving of memory, small but weighty, fragile but enduring. And in this act, he joined not only the work of parchment makers, but the long river of writers before him, those monks who had copied scriptures, those clerks who had preserved laws, those poets who had set down verses, each one adding to the accumulation of human thought that parchment carried forward. And thus, a scribe's fear of mistakes was not personal anxiety, but a recognition of responsibility, for his letters did not belong to him alone, but to all who would one day read them. Scholars yet unborn, voices yet unheard, eyes that would trace the lines centuries later in libraries far beyond his imagining. And so when his quill hovered above parchment, he felt the weight often seen generations, the long thread of memory, the chain of craft, and this awareness drew him deeper into porcelains. For in the scriptorium words were not spoken but written, not shouted but whispered into being by the scratch of quills. Each page filled slowly, like a field being sown with seeds. Each mistake feared as much as a failed harvest. Each finished line a relief, each completed sheet a quiet victory. And as the scribe continued, day after day, his body grew accustomed to the rhythm of parchment, to its slight resistance under quill, to its faint animal smell that lingered even after preparation, to the way it curled slightly at the edges when damp air crept in, to the way it stiffened when the seasons turned cold. And so parchment was never just material but companion, shaping his days, shaping his patience, shaping even his prayers. For in its presence he was reminded of mortality, of care, of the delicate thread that joins labor, craft, and thought. And so, though parchment was precious in cost, it was more precious still in meaning, for it became the bridge between human fragility and endurance, between fleeting hands and lasting words, between silence and memory. And this is why scribes feared mistakes, not out of terror of punishment, but out of reverence for what parchment represented, the culmination of hidden lives, hidden labor, hidden care. And as he sat under the glow of beeswax candles, the scribe knew, even if he never said it, that each sheet of parchment was a reminder of both the fragility of life and the endurance of memory, a page both vulnerable and eternal, waiting patiently beneath the quill for thought to take form. The quill was the scribe's most personal tool, and to understand it is to step quietly into the slow heartbeat of the medieval scriptorium, where silence was not emptiness but fullness, filled with the faint scratching of feather-against parchment, a sound so soft yet so constant that it seemed to measure time itself, like the dripping of water or the turning of a mill wheel, a rhythm that lulled the mind into focus and gave the body its own small ritual of movement. The quill, cut carefully from goose or swan, was more than a tool, it was a companion, prepared with the patience of one who knew that writing was not speed but devotion, its shaft trimmed and shaped with a small sharp knife, its nib split delicately down the center so that ink might flow in a controlled stream, its tip tested again and again on scraps until it carried the ink evenly, smoothly, like a calm breath spreading across the surface of the page. And in that preparation already there was a lesson for the scribe waistort to pause, to sharpen, to adjust, to respect the small things before the larger work could begin. Each scribe knew his own quill's temperament, whether it bent slightly to the right or to the left, whether it allowed a steady hand to draw long, clean strokes, or demanded shorter, gentler lines. And this intimacy created a bond, as if Thak carried a personality of its own, like a horse beneath a rider, or a lute beneath a musician's hands, obedient yet spirited, requiring understanding as much as skill. And once dipped into the small pot of ink, the quill gave a voice, not in words at first, but in the steady song of scratching, the whispering touch of point against parchment, a music so constant that the scriptorium itself seemed alive with it. Dozens of scribes bent over their desks, their quills all singing together in a harmony that was never loud, but never absent, a sound like rain tapping gently on a wooden roof, each drop distinct, but together forming a rhythm that calmed rather than distracted, reminding the very man that he was part of a whole, that his solitary task was woven into the labor of the community. Yet the quill, for all its quiet companionship, demanded great care, for ink could blot, parchment could tear, and even the steadiest hand could falter. So the scribe moved slowly, letting his breathing match the pace of his writing, inhaling as he dipped, exhaling as he drew each stroke, until body and tool moved as one, and fatigue was the greatest enemy, creeping in not with noise but with the trembling of fingers, the heaviness of eyelids, the drifting of thought. And it was in such moments that mistakes were born, not from ignorance or haste, but from the smallest lapse in concentration, a momentary slip of focus, a quill pressed too hard, a curve drawn too wide, a dot misplaced, and the fear of such errors was always present, hovering like a shadow at the edge of the scribe's. For every mistake meant not only the risk of spoiling words, but the wasting of precious parchment, the fruit of weeks of labor by others, the skin of animals carefully stretched, scraped, polished, now entrusted to his care. And so the quill became more than a feather, more than a sharpened shaft. It became a reminder of responsibility, each stroke an act of trust, each completed word a small triumph over the ever-waiting possibility of failure. Yet the quill's song softened that fear, for when the scribes wrote together, the harmony reassured them, each man hearing not only his own scratching but the collective rhythm, like monks chanting in unison, voices weaving together in praise. So too did the quills weave a music that turned labor into devotion, repetition into meditation, and slowly, hour by hour, line by line, the page filled, the song continuing. Sometimes rising wine ink flowed richly, sometimes fading when quills grew dull and had to be resharpened, the sound punctuated by the faint click of knives against wood, the sigh of a man stretching cramped fingers, the creak of inches, yet always returning to the scratch, the steady scratch, like the pulse of the scriptorium itself. In this way the quill was not merely an object but a teacher, instructing patience, humility, discipline, reminding the scribe that progress was measured not in haste but in constancy, that beauty was built from the smallest offstrokes, and as the quill wore down, as its tip split too far or its shaft grew weak, it was retired gently, replaced by another, yet never discarded without respect, for each had sung its part. Each had given its small voice to the great chorus of letters that preserved the wisdom of generations, and in that knowledge the scribe found comfort, that even in silence his quill spoke, and even in solitude he was never alone. For the quiet song of writing bound him to all who had written before and all who would write after, a melody of ink and feather, fragile yet enduring, soft yet strong, always whispering across the centuries. The words flowed in steady black ink, but it was the colors that gave the manuscript its living breath. And Tonta, the world of illumination, was to step into a realm where patience met radiance, where earth itself was ground into powder and reborn as light on parchment, where minerals carried across deserts and oceans found new life in the margins of prayer books and chronicles, where pigments were more than decorations, they wareth voices of distant lands and secret alchemies, whispers of trade routes and nature's hidden brilliance. And the illuminator seated beside the scribe worked with quiet devotion, grinding stone upon stone, until mortar sang softly with the rhythm of effort, filling the air with a fine dust of lapis lazuli or malachite, a dust that smelled off mountain caves and far-off quarries, mixed with the sweetness of honey, the tang of vinegar, the warmth of egg yolk beaten into golden binder, and slowly, color was born, not in haste but in careful drops, brushed into thin layers that dried into a brilliance which seemed almost otherworldly, for what else could make blue so deep it recalled twilight seas, or red so vivid it glowed like fresh fire, or gold so bright it seemed to capture sunlight itself and hold it still upon the page. Each hue carried its own story, lapis from the mountains of Afghanistan, carried by caravans through Persia and into the hands of merchants in Venice, ground into powder so costly That scribes joked it was like painting with jewels, vermilion drawn from cinnabar stone, a red so intense it was linked to blood, life, sacrifice, and power. Malachite and verdigris offering greens that spoke of forests and renewal, carbon blacks deep as midnight, chalk whites pale as morning frost, and above all, the delicate sheets of gold leaf, hammered so thin that a breath of air could tear them. Yet when laid upon the page they gleamed like stars, like divine fire, their brilliance never fading, unlike paints that dulled with time. And so gold was not merely beauty, it was eternity, a symbol of heaven fixed within human hands. The process was sensory in every detail, from the sound of pestles grinding stone to the sticky feel of glare, the clear part of egg white foamed and strained, used as binder, from the faint smell of gum arabic melting into water to the crackle of gold leaf as it was lifted with a brush and pressed gently into place, from the sight of rich pigments drying slowly into deeper tones to the touch of parchment, cool and smooth beneath careful fingers. And in this atmosphere, illumination became not merely craft but meditation, each brushstroke demanding the quieting of thought. The steadying off-breath for a slip could not be undone. A single drop of ultramarine spilled across text could mar days of labor. A misplaced stroke of red could throw a saint's robe into chaos. And the thought of wasting such costly material, carried so far, prepared with such difficulty, was a fear that hovered like a shadow. Yet it did not crush the illuminator, for he learned to balance pressure with calm, to turn his work into a dialogue between patience and beauty, between fear and faith, knowing that the page itself demanded reverence. The margins of the manuscript bloomed slowly under his hand, vines curling into intricate knots, flowers opening their petals in quiet brilliance, animals peering from leaves with playful eyes, saints standing solemn in robes of radiant blue or gold, angels with wings that shimmered, initials stretching large and proud, their bodies filled with intricate patterns of red, green, and blue, all transforming the written word into a garden, a cathedral, a vision of heaven caught within. Under the glow of lanterns, when the day waned and the air grew still, the gold leaf caught light and scattered it like fire across stone walls, so that even a dim scriptorium seemed filled with stars, and the men bent over their work felt for a moment that they touched the eternal, that their patient strokes were not only labor but devotion, turning long hours into prayer, turning duty into art, turning the fragile page into a treasure meant to outlive kingdoms. For manuscripts were not written for a season but for centuries, and illumination, more than any ink, gave them their timeless glow. Thus the work, though costly, though demanding, though fraught with a risk, was soothing, for each color carried the illuminator deeper into contemplation. Each completed border was like a garden tended, each page finished like a dawn rising from darkness, and so in the union of scribe and illuminator, word and color, parchment and pigment, there was harmony, and in that harmony lay the calm song of illumination, soft yet enduring, a song that continues to whisper through the ages whenever one opens a manuscript and sees gold gleam like sunlight, blue deepen like night sky, and red glow like embers of devotion. The life of the medieval cloister was shaped not by clocks, for mechanical devices of time had not yet entered daily existence, but by the deep, resonant toll of bells. Each strike was like a ripple moving through the silence of stone walls and echoing across cloister gardens, a sound that carried meaning far beyond its simple vibrational metal. In a world where the sun and seasons were the greater measures of time, the bell offered a smaller human rhythm, gentle, steady, and unyielding. For the monks and scribes within the cloister, the bell was not only a tool of order, but also a companion, one that broke silence without shattering it, one that gave shape to their prayers, their work, their meals, and their rest. It was not simply a call to action, but a call to presence, a reminder that life in the cloister was lived not according to individual desire, but to communal harmony. The bell rang, and all bowed to its voice. The quill paused, the spoon was lifted, the prayer was begun, and life moved forward with the simple grace of obedience to sound. Morning began with the earliest bell, its voice ringing out before the first light broke across stone walls. To rise at its call was to submit body and soul to a rhythm older than one's own. Monks and scribes stirred from narrow wooden beds, cloaks pulled tight against chill air, bare feet touching cold floors. The courtyard still lay in darkness, save for the faint shimmer of stars above the cloister roof. Yet, as the bell echoed, its deep notes rolling outward, all knew it was time for prayer. They moved in silence, candles flickering in their hands, toward the chapel where chant would soon rise like incense. Here, the day began not with rush or speech, but with harmony. Voices weaving psalms into the air, words dissolving into the stones, as though the building itself was singing. For the scribe, this was a kind of preparation, a cleansing of thought before returning to parchment and ink, as though the voice must be stilled and the mind settled before words could flow once more. The bell, in summoning prayer, also summoned focus, training Thibody into rhythm before quill touched page. After prayer, another bell sounded the call to the first meal. Food was plain, and simplicity was considered a virtue. Bread, hard yet filling, was torn by hand. Cheese, often sharper, earthy, offered sustenance. Broth or porridge might appear on colder days, steam rising gently as the men ate together in silence. It was not the variety of dishes that nourished them, but the stillness of the meal itself. Thesense that eating was not indulgence but gratitude. Conversations were rare, for silence was itself a form of, yet the shared presence of others, the shuffle of feet, the sound of chewing, the occasional cough was a comfort, reminding each man that though his inner journey was solitary, his life was communal. And again, as meal ended, the bell marked the passage of time, calling them back to labor with a voice as patient as thought ticking of waves upon a shore. In the scriptorium, the bell governed the flow of work. To the scribe, it was both relief and discipline. Hours spent bent over parchment could numb the body, strain the eyes, and weary the hand, but the bell gave pause. When it rang, quills were set down, inkpots covered carefully to prevent drying, and hands stretched stiffly in the cool air. The sound offered a chance to rise, to walk briefly in the cloister garden. To let eyes rest upon greenery instead of cramped letters. The bell was not a command to hurry, but an invitation to breathe. In this, it became more than structure. It became kindness. For when work was resumed, the scribe turned refreshed, his strokes steadier, his letters clearer. Mistakes were fewer. When life itself moved gently, the bell, by breaking the monotony, saved both the manuscript and the man. Through the day, bells continued to weave their rhythm. Midday prayer, afternoon labor, evening meal, final rest, each was shaped by sound. And then, like the abrupt chime of modern clocks, the medieval bell seemed almost alive, its deep resonance carrying Gacris fields, its fading echo lingering like a voice speaking from beyond the walls. Villagers outside the cloister heard it too, and for them it was not only the monk's guide, but their own. Farmers in the fields might straighten their backs when the bell rang, wiping sweat from brows, marking the hour by sound rather than shadow. For the cloister, however, it meant constancy. The bell's song was the same whether rain or snow fell, whether war ragged bind the hills or peace lay across the land. It reminded them that life, no matter how uncertain, could be lived in balance. The effect of this rhythm was profound. For the scribes, who devoted hours to the fragile task of occupying texts, the bell was reassurance. In its toll they found structure, in its cycle they found rest, and in its constancy they found calm. The human mind, when given too much freedom, wanders, rushes, or grows restless, but when guided by a gentle rhythm, it settles into harmony. Thus, the bell was not a chain but a song, not Amistar but a companion. It spoke not of urgency but of presence, not of deadlines but of devotion. In this way, the bells transformed ordinary labor into meditation, reminding the scribe that his work was not a race but aporia, written slowly, steadily, with ink, color, and patience. As night approached, the final bell tolled, low and heavy, as though carrying the weight of the day itself. The scriptorium darkened, lanterns snuffed, parchment set aside. The men gathered once more for prayer, voices weaving together in calm unity, before returning to their simple beds. Outside, stars shone silently, but within the cloister, the echo of bells lingered in memory, carrying Yento's sleep. The cycle was complete, yet tomorrow it would begin again, unchanged, steady as ever. For the cloister, time was not about progress or loss, but about rhythm, and the bell ensured that rhythm endured. Thibody of this way of life was its absence of haste. In modern times, hours are sliced into minutes, minutes into seconds, and each tick is a reminder of passing time, of urgency, of fleeting opportunity. But in the cloister, time was not something to be chased, it was something to be lived. Bells, with their slow resonance, taught patience. They softened the passage of time, reminding each man that there was enough, that life need not be hurried. The scribe, guided by bells, knew when to pause, when to eat, when to pray, when to rest. And in that structure, the freedom from anxiety, from distraction, from the chaos of a rushing world. The bell sang, and all well heard it remembered that life was best lived gently. Thus, the bells of routine were not only instruments of time-keeping, but instruments of the spirit. They bound the community together, linked each day to the next, and out a life of balance between work and worship, silence and song, solitude and fellowship. For the medieval scribe, they were as essential as parchment or ink, for without them, life would lose its rhythm and work would lose its calm. To hear the bell was to be reminded that his labor, however small, was part of a larger harmony, and in this harmony, both words and lives found their place. When winter fell over the cloister, the rhythm of the scriptorium shifted. The sun, once generous in its hours, now withdrew earlier, leaving the stone halls to depend on the quiet strength of lanterns and candles. The scriptorium became a chamber of shadows, a place where light itself was precious, fragile, and alive. Beeswax gondolas stood tall in iron holders, their steady flames burning with a golden radiance that softened the edges of the parchment. Tallow lamps, less noble but more common, filled the air with their faintly acrid scent, their smoke curling into the beams of the ceiling. The flickering glow painted the faces of scribes in amber, throwing their bent silhouettes against the walls, where shadows seemed to work alongside them, silent companions, tough art of writing. In such dimness, the act of copying a manuscript became more than labor. It beckoned endurance, the eye strained to follow each line, the hands slowed to prevent errors, and the entire body leaned closer to the small pool of light. The scribe's world shrank until only the parchment, quill, and faint glow before him existed. Beyond the reach of the flame stretched the darkness of the cloister corridors, fading into obscurity. Gardens hidden by frost, the silent wings of bats brushing past the stone arches outside. Inside, time moved differently under lantern light. It no longer felt like a flowing river, but rather like drops of water, steady and separate, falling one after another into the stillness of night. The shadows themselves became a language. They stretched long across benches, weaving between legs of tables, climbing over shelves of manuscripts, bending and shifting with the unsteady flame. Sometimes, the shadow of a scribe's hand appeared larger than the scribe himself, magnified upon the wall, as though the act of writing was not his alone but something greater, a gesture belonging to time itself. Shadows seemed alive, whispering, with movement, reminding each worker of the thin line between clarity and obscurity, light and dark, truth and error. To work in such conditions required patience beyond measure, for every letter copied was a victory against the pull of fatigue, and the temptation of mist. Eyes bore the greatest burden. Lantern light was kind, but it was not the steady radiance of the sun. It trembled, flickered, shifted at the whim of every draft. A scribe might find his vision blurred suddenly when a flame bent low, or when smoke thickened in the air. Fatigue deepened this strain. Hours of bending forward, squinting at the fine strokes of letters, caused eyes to redden, water, or burn. Yet, in these moments, scribes pressed on. They blinked away, the blur breathed slowly, and steadied their hands. To surrender to exhaustion, leaving a page unfinished, a thought interrupted, a sacred word incomplete. For many, perseverance in lantern light was an act of devotion, a quiet prayer written not with words but with endurance itself. Despite these hardships, there was beauty in the glow of evening labor. Parchment, creamy and faintly luminous, cemento gathered the lanterns, warmth as though it absorbed light into its very skin. Ink appeared darker, sharper, almost to live upon the page. Gold leaf, so delicate by day, now flared brilliantly, catching fire from even the smallest flicker of flame. The illumination seemed no longer flat decoration but living radiance, tiny suns embedded in the margins, stars scattered across the parchment. For the illuminators, night was a stage upon which their colors performed, glowing in the hush of the chamber like jewels under torchlight. The sounds of the scriptorium changed as well. In daylight, The quill scratched with confidence, steady and swift, blending into a soft symphony of work. At night, the rhythm slowed. Each quill seemed more deliberate, pausing more often. The hand needed to double-check its fidelity to the text. The room was hushed, words were seldom spoken. Now and then, a long sigh would escape, or a weary back would creak against a wooden bench. The dripping of tallow, the faint crackle of a candlewick bending into wax, or the shuffle of feet adjusting to stiffness, these became the night's music. Silence ruled, but silence alive with small sounds, each one amplified by this. The lantern hours also carried a spiritual weight. For monks and scribes, light was more than necessity, it was symbol. The flame was the soul's vigil, the lantern an earthly echo of divine illumination. To labor under its glow was to participate in a sacred metaphor, words of scripture or knowledge born out of darkness into light. Many scribes whispered prayers as they worked, asking for guidance that their hands not falter. Others found in the glow a meditative rhythm, where each stroke of the quill aligned with the flicker of flame, where each completed page felt like a small triumph over night's embrace. The scriptorium bathed in soft gold, seemade transformed into a sanctuary where time, toil, and devotion met in fragile harmony. Yet night also tested their spirit. Fatigue was heavy, creeping into limbs and mind. A scribe might catch himself writing a line twice, forgetting where his eyes last rested, or drifting into thoughts far removed from the text before him. The temptation to abandon work for sleep was strong, especially when the flame grew low and shadows deepened. But discipline was the armor of the scriptorium. Bells, though muffled at night, still told the hours, and their sound carried strength. Two weary bodies, a page finished by lantern light carried more than ink. It carried evidence of will, proof that, even in weakness, persistence endured. Sometimes, moments of shared humanity softened the night's rigor. When wax sputtered and a flame died, another scribe would lean across to relight it, their face briefly illuminated by a shared glow. A glance exchanged in the dimness was enough to remind them they were not alone in this quiet battle against darkness. Brotherhood deepened under lantern light, for fatigue leveled oldest. The most skilled illuminator and the most humble novice both bent wearily, both sighed, both found their hands cramped and their eyes sore. The shadows made them equal, united in patience, perseverance, and purpose. Outside the scriptorium, the night pressed close. The cloister's gardens lay silent under frost, trees bare, ponds frozen into sheets of silver. The wind whistled faintly through cloister arches, its breath slipping under the door to stir the flames. Sometimes owls hooted, or distant dogs barked, reminders that beyond these walls, life continued in its wild, unstructured rhythm. But within the scriptorium, time belonged to the bells, the lanterns, the slow drip of wax, and the scratch of quills. To cross the threshold was to step into a world apart, a chamber where darkness could never fully conquer because human persistence held the flame alive. As midnight deepened, shadows grew bolder. They no longer danced lightly but sprawled thick across the floor, merging into a single mass of blackness at the edges of the room. Lanterns grew shorter, their flames bending low, sputtering no, and then, as wax dwindled, yet even then, scribes pressed on. The last lines of a page often carried signs of weariness, a stroke less firm, a letter leaning slightly askew, but they were completed, sealed into permanence. The determination of their maker. Each finished page was more than text. It was testimony to endurance, to light preserved in darkness, to human will standing against time and fatigue. Thus, lantern light and shadow shaped not only the manuscripts, but also the souls of those who created them. They taught patience, humility, and resilience. They revealed that beauty was not born only in ease and clarity, but also in struggle and dire menace. To copy by lantern was to learn that even in the smallest flame, persistence could find brilliance, and even in the deepest shadow, the human hand could carve light. The scriptorium at night was not merely a workshop, it was a living metaphor, where endurance turned labor into devotion, and shadows became the backdrop against which light proved its strength. Manuscripts of the medieval world often appear solemn at first glance. Psalters, legal charters, chronicles of kings, and texts of theology written in careful script. They stand as pillars of tradition and devotion, their straight lines and uniform letters echoing the discipline of cloisters and scriptoria. Yet, Hidden at the edges of these pages, in the margins, where formality loosened its grip, lived an entirely different story of slaughter, imagination, rebellion, and subtle humanity. These margins became a canvas for playfulness, for moments of lightness amid the long hours of labor, giving birth to what we now call marginalia. It is here, in these delicate corners, that the medieval scribe's personality glimmers most vividly, showing that even within a culture steeped in solemnity, joy insisted on finding space. The act of copying sacred or important texts demanded an extraordinary level of discipline. A monk hunched over parchment for hours, his body stiff, high sighs straining under candlelight, his quill scratching with repetitive rhythm. Every letter was a prayer, every word a task bound to responsibility. Yet the human spirit, especially when constrained, seeks outlets for release. The margins offered just that, empty spaces along the sides of carefully ruled lines where imagination could wander. It was not uncommon to find lively sketches alongside passages of scripture, a bird perched near the psalmist's plea, a mischievous monkey climbing a vine near the words of a sermon, or even a grotesque face peering out from behind a capital letter. To the medieval scribe, these little illustrations were not distractions from devotion, but companions to it, a way to humanize the otherwise unrelenting solemnity of their work. Thekens of marginalia varied as widely as the scribes themselves. Some filled the edges with delicate vines, curling into endless spirals, adorned with flowers, berries, and leaves. These botanical forms mirrored the natural world outside the cloister walls, a reminder of God's creation brought into the page. Others leaned toward humor, drawing animals in absurd situations. Rabbits hunting hunters, knights battling snails, or cats dressed as bishops. These odd juxtapositions make modern readers laugh, yet they carried subtle meanings. Rabbits, often symbols of timidity, became warriors, flipping expectations. Snails, slow and harmless, were depicted as formidable foes, perhaps mocking knights who boasted of valor. A simple doodle, then, became satire, commentary, or just playful nonsense, each possibility speaking volumes about the scribe's wit. Marginalia also served as secretaries of sorts. A bored or weary monk might sketch something from daily life, a rooster strutting, a fish pulled from a river, or even a caricature of another monk dozing off during prayers. These drawings remind us that scribes were not faceless hands, but real individuals with humor, frustrations, and friendships. The margin became a private stage where personality peeked through, even if never meant for the public eye. Centuries later, we encounter these sketches like whispers from the past, laughing with the scribes across the gulf of time. Yet, beyond humor, there was artistry. Some margins contained elaborate miniature paintings, saints kneeling in prayer, angels with wings that shimmered in gold leaf, or mythical beasts rendered in vivid color. This illuminated margins extended the sacred text into a visual meditation. A reader encountering the Gospel of Matthew might simultaneously gaze upon a painted lion, the evangelist's symbol, its mane flowing in brilliant trads and golds. Thus, the margins became an extension of devotion, a place where text and art joined to deepen the spiritual encounter. Even the most playful doodles held a kind of reverence, for to create beauty was itself an offering. Interestingly, mistakes were often transformed into marginalia, a blot of ink, an accidental smear across parchments. Such errors could not easily be erased, but scribes were resourceful. A blot might become the body of a bird, a crooked line, the beginning of a vine. What could have been waste or shame turned into delight, a testament to resilience and creativity. This practice softened the fear of error, reminding us that medieval work was not only about perfection but also adaptation. In this way, the margins embody a philosophy. Life itself, with its mistakes and imperfections, can be reshaped into art. The playful nature of marginalia also reflects the culture of learning in medieval monasteries and universities. Students, like scribes, often doodled in the margins of their notebooks, sketching masters, animals, or jokes alongside Latin texts. For them, these drawings were memory aids, ways of making dense material more approachable. Humor lightened the weight of scholarship. Even in the most serious settings, play became part of learning, and the boundary between sacred and silly blurred in the space of a few inches of parchment. gold leaf and bright pigments were sometimes applied even to these playful drawings, showing that patrons of manuscripts, whether abbots or nobles, valued beauty and humor alike. Thuolthy, who commissioned books, likely delighted in these hidden surprises. To turn a page and find a knight fighting a snail beside a prayer must have amused as well as inspired. Books were expensive treasures, but within them lived not only solemn wisdom but also laughter, perhaps suggesting that joy itself was seen as part of divine truth. For the scribes themselves, marginalia offered mental relief. Copying line after line was an act of endurance. Hands cramped, eyes blurred, minds wandered. To pause and sketch a rabbit or a grotesque face whilst or breathe, to break the monotony, it kept the work human, sustainable. Just as the bells of routine structured Thea days, so did these playful drawings offer tiny moments of reprieve, preventing despair or burnout. The margins became sanctuaries of creativity within the discipline of devotion. The images also remind us that medieval people were not one-dimensional. Too often, we imagine them as endlessly pious, weighed down by solemn rituals, alien to modern humor. Yet the margins of manuscripts prove otherwise. They laughed, teased imagined absurdities, and found delight in nonsense. A bishop might be mocked through a cartoonish animaldrist in vestments. A solemn sermon might be lightened by a doodle of a frog playing a fiddle. Their world, like ours, balanced seriousness with humor, devotion with play. The cultural richness of marginalia cannot be overstated, and it opens a window into medieval imagination beyond official narratives. Kings and bishops appear in chronicles, battles and councils fill the annals, but the margins whisper of daily life, the sound of farm animals, the humor of friends, the creativity sparked by boredom. They remind us that history is not only grand events but also small smiles, ink-stained jokes, and playful hearts hidden in sacred books. In some ways, marginalia predict modern art's blending of high and low, sacred and profane. Just as modern cartoons can critical politics or lighten serious news, medieval doodles often commented on authority or life itself. They may appear, but they carried subtle satire. A snail facing a knight might question chivalric values. A monkey in robes might mock clerical hypocrisy. Humor became a tool of reflection, disguised within play. As the centuries passed, many of these manuscripts survived, and their margins continue to surprise us. Museums today display them not only as sacred relics but also as glimpses of humanity. Visitors laugh to see a rabbit jousting or a grotesque face sticking out its tongue beside a psalm. These small drawings bridge time, reminding us that people shared the same instincts for humor, imagination, and rebellion. Ultimately, the margins of playfulness show us that even within the most structured lives, creativity refuses to be silenced. The scribe, bound by obedience, still found freedom in the flick of a quill, the curl of a vine, the absurdity of a snail-knight dot. The margins did not diminish the sacredness of the text, but enriched it, weaving joy into devotion, reminding both reader and scribe that faith and laughter can coexist. In the end, the manuscripts we inherit are not cold monuments of discipline, but living dialogues between order and spontaneity. The black ink of scripture runs down the center, solemn and steady, while at the edges, vines bloom, animals play, faces grin, and imagination inces. Together, they form a fuller picture of medieval life, disciplined yet joyful, reverent yet playful, serious yet human. The margins whisper still, centuries later. Yes, we worked hard, we prayed deeply, but we also do not forget the joy hidden in the edges of things. The life of a medieval scribe was not lived in isolation from the world beyond cloister walls. Although their scriptoria were enclosed, their air heavy with ink and parchment dust, the rhythms of nature always seeped in through windows, doors, and courtyards. Each season carried its own signature, impressing itself subtly yet unmistakably upon the scribe's work. As the year turned, quills scratched with a different tempo, inks behaved in curious ways, and the human body responded to heat, cold, light, and darkness. To read a medieval manuscript carry is to sense not only the steady hand of devotion, but also the slow march of seasons, the cycles of Theath woven invisibly into every page. Summer was the season most favorable to scribes. With sunlight lingering late into the evening, the scriptorium was bathed in natural brightness. Lamps and candles, so often necessary in darker months, stood unused for hours, their wicks trimmed but untouched. Windows were unshuttered, letting breezes drift in from gardens and fields. The fragrance of clover, lavender, and ripening grain entered alongside deathy hum of bees. For scribes bent over parchment, these were welcome companions, softening the monotony. Of repetition, ink dried swiftly in the warmth, lines remaining crisp and clean, and quills glided with a sense of ease. The body, too, moved more freely in summer. Woolen habits felt lighter when sleeves were rolled, fingers nimble instead of stiff, and the mind less clouded by the sluggishness of cold. Mistakes, though never absent, seemed rarer. The energy of the sun lent concentration, and long hours passed with less strain. Yet summer brought challenges of its own. The heat, while pleasant in moderation, sometimes grew stifling within stone walls. Sweat threatened to drip onto precious pages, and parchment itself, sensitive to moisture and temperature, could curl or stiffen unpredictably. Flies, drawn to ink and food scraps, buzzed persistently, testing the patience of even the most disciplined hand. Some scribes scribbled complaints in the margins about such pests, humorous asides that centuries later still echo their frustration. Still, for all its minor irritations, summer was the season of productivity, when manuscripts grew fastest, letters flowing across pages in abundance. Autumn arrived with gentler light and cooler air. The scriptorium, once filled with the golden blaze of high summer, took in a more muted glow. Outside, fields were busy with harvest, the smell of grain and apples drifting through leaves swirled in courtyards, their colors crimson, amber, russet mirroring the pigments prepared to be illuminators within. Autumn was a season of transition, where scribes often felt a mixture of calm and melancholy. Work continued steadily, yet the shortening days reminded all that winter's hardships approached in autumn. Ink behaved differently. Moist air slowed its drying, leaving lines slightly smudged if not given care. Parchment absorbed the damp, softening to the touch, which sometimes made quills drag unevenly. Yet scribes adapted, slowing their pace, letting each word settle before moving to the next. The slower rhythm carried its own kind of beauty. Pages completed in autumn seemed quieter, their lines infused with patience rather than urgency. To a modern reader, the strokes of autumn might appear heavier, as though reflecting both the weight of harvest and the contemplative turn of nature itself. Winter, by contrast, tested the endurance of every scribe. The stone walls of monasteries, thick though they were, offered little protection from biting cold. Frost crept across window panes, breath hung visible in the air, and ink in its pot thickened until nearly frozen. Candles and lanterns became constant companions, their flames casting wavering halos of gold against parchment. But light wasn't quite sufficient. Shadows stretched long, and the strain on the eyes was relentless. Fatigue set in quickly. Hands numbed beneath woolen sleeves, trembled with stiffness. Even the simplest letters could falter when fingers refused to obey the will of the mind. Mistakes multiplied in winter. A blot of ink spilled more easily from a stiff quill. A shaky hand produced uneven lines, and entire passages sometimes needed scraping away with knives to correct them. Scribes bore these frustrations with a mix of resignation and perseverance. Winter was censured more than enjoyed. Yet paradoxically, the hardships of the season also fostered resilience. To write faith through freezing days was itself an act of devotion. Each completed page in winter felt less like routine and more like triumph, a testament to endurance against cold and weariness. The soundscape of winter differed. The usual rustle of leaves or hum of insects gave way to silence punctuated by howling winds or the crack of ice. Within, the scriptorium seemed hushed, as if the weight of frost outside pressed upon its walls. Quill scratched more slowly, sighs of fatigue rose more frequently, and the occasional cough echoed harshly. In meals, often thicker soups and heavier bread, offered brief comfort, but even these were taken quickly. Forecold made sitting still unbearable. In this way, winter imprinted itself deeply upon the memory of scribes, shaping their pace, their mood, and even their style of writing. When spring finally returned, it brought renewal not only to fields and gardens, but also to the hearts of those at desks. Windows were opened wide once more, letting in the patter of rain on cloister tiles and the scent of herbs sprouting fresh. Birds returned with their songs, filling the air with life after months of silence. For scribes, the change was palpable. Fingers loosened, ice brightened, and spirits lifted with the greening of the earth. Ink flowed more easily in the moderate warmth, neither thickening as in winter nor drying too fast as in summer. Parchment, too, behaved well, supple and cooperative beneath the quill. Mistakes grew fewer, not merely from improved conditions, but from a sense of joy renewed. Work felt lighter, more inspired, as if every page carried the freshness of budding branches and flowing streams. Marginalia of spring often revealed playful touches, sketches of flowers, birds, or sprouting vines as though scribes could not resist echoing the world beyond their walls. The cycle of seasons gave structure to monastic life, just as surely as the toll of bells each time of year demanded its own patience, shaping both the pace and the character of manuscripts. Summer's energy, autumn's reflection, winter's endurance, and spring's renewal all found subtle expression in the words and illuminations preserved across centuries. To study medieval manuscripts is thus to see not only faith and discipline, but also the quiet dialogue between humanity and nature, between ink and air, between parchment and time itself. In the end, scribes did not resist seasons, they absorbed them. They understood that just as the earth turned from light to dark, from warmth to cold, so too did human labor move through cycles of ease and struggle. The manuscripts they produced, filled with sacred words and adorned with colors, bore silent testimony to this truth. Beneath the surface of every pagelle, the memory of sunlight or frost, of buzzing bees or howling winds, of blossoms or falling leaves, each season whispered into the margins, leaving traces invisible yet eternal. Thus, the scribe's desk was never only a place of ink and parchment. It was a mirror of the world beyond, a stage upon which the drama of the seasons unfolded in miniature. To sit at that desk was to live not outside of time but within its deepest rhythms, where threatening of the year inscribed itself upon every letter. And so the manuscripts of the Middle Ages, treasured still today, remain more than records of words, they are echoes of seasons. Pages where summer's warmth, autumn's calm, winter's endurance, and spring's renewal still linger, eternal, companions to the patient labor of those who once bent their heads in devotion. Silence was not emptiness, it was a companion, a living presence that shaped the very rhythm of medieval life. Inside the cloister, silence was not an accident of architecture but a discipline, cultivated with the same devotion with which the monks tended their gardens or copied their scriptures. To a modern mind accustomed to noise, silence might feel heavy, even oppressive, yet to the scribes bent over their parchment in the scriptoria, silence was a balm, a blessing, and a form of nourishment. Within the hush of stone walls, their minds found clarity, their hands steadiness, and their work meaning. The absence of idle chatter did not leave a void, but instead filled the air with subtler sounds, the scratch of quills across vellum, the faint rustle of robes brushing against benches, the creak of wooden stools, the distant coo of doves roosting in cloister eaves, or the faint toll of a bell carried by wind. Every sound became significant, not because it was loud, but because it was rare, and within that rarity a deep sense of presence. In this silence, thought deepened naturally. Words copied from sacred texts seemed to flow more steadily, their meanings sinking into the scribe's consciousness as though planted in fertile soil. There was no hurry, for silence erased the urgency of the outside world. Instead, there was patience, and patience siloed letters to be formed with care. The quill dipped, rose, and moved slowly over the parchment, each stroke measured, each flourish deliberate. Silence encouraged a kind of meditative attention. It was as if the mind, free from distraction, could finally align itself with the rhythm of the hand. Prayer and labor blended seamlessly together, the written word itself becoming an act of devotion, and silence provided the vessel in which the sacred union could thrive. Far from being cold, silence held warmth. It carried with it a subtle intimacy, the shared acknowledgement among the monks and scribes that they were united in their quiet discipline. To sit in a room with many others and yet hear nothing but the faintest human sounds was to feel a profound solidarity. The absence of speech was not a barrier but a bond. Each person respected the other's concentration, each contributed to the collective hush, and together they created an atmosphere where the divine seemed nearer. Even when silence was kuna, cough echoing briefly in the rafters, the shuffle of sandaled feet, the ringing off, a bell that marked the hours, it was never an intrusion. These interruptions were not disruptions, but reminders of life's natural flow, markers in the fabric of time that quickly dissolved back into stillness. The comfort of silence was not simply in what it allowed, but in what it prevented. Without chatter, there was less room for distraction, less risk of errors that might ruin hours of painstaking labor. A slip of the quill, a blot of ink, or a misword could render a page unusable, wasting both precious materials and long hours of human effort. Silence protected against such mistakes, giving scribes the calm they needed to focus wholly on their craft. The pressure of perfection lessened in the absence of noise. The mind, untroubled by conversation or commotion, could rest more fully in its work. In this way, silence was both shield and companion, preserving not only the beauty of manuscripts but also the peace of those who made them. To modern ears, silence may feel unnatural, even unsettling. We are accustomed to the hum of machines, the chatter of voices, the constant intrusion of news, music, or conversation. To step into silence is to confront oneself, to face the quiet truths often buried beneath distraction. For the medieval scribe, however, silence was not confrontation but refuge. It was the expected, cultivated, and cherished. It softened the harshness of labor, allowing the hours to flow not with haste but with gentle rhythm. Silence made long workdays bearable, even beautiful. It transformed the repetitive act of occupying into something greater than itself, a meditation, a prayer, a form of discipline that reached beyond ink and parchment to touch the spirit. Silence also connected the scribe to the natural world in ways often overlooked. With the absence of chatter, the smallest sounds became vivid. The call of a sparrow at the window was no longer background noise, but a gentle reminder of creation's presence beyond stone walls. The wind's whistle through narrow gaps in the cloister was no longer a nuisance, but a soft hymn of nature. The steady drip of rain outside became as rhythmic as a chant, merging with the scratch of quills inside to form a symphony of subtlety. In silence, the world became sharper, each detail amplified, each sensation granted its rightful place. The scribe, though enclosed in stone, remained attuned to the broader rhythms of life outside. There was also humility in silence. In the scriptorium, no voice was louder than another. No ego proclaimed itself above the rest. The silence leveled all, reminding each scribe that he was but one part of a greater whole. His task a contribution, a work that stretched beyond his own life. The manuscripts copied in silence would outlast their makers, carried forward through centuries, while the names of those who penned them often faded into obscurity. Yet silence offered comfort here too, for it taught the scribe to see his role not as diminished but as sanctified. To labor quietly without recognition was not a burden but a gift, a way of serving something larger than the self. Silence prepared the heart for this surrender, softening pride, fostering humility, and deepening devotion. There were moments, of course, when silence itself carried challenges. Fatigue could make silence heavy, and the long hours could tempt a wandering mind. In such times, silence was not a comfort but a weight, pressing down with its stillness. Yet even then, the scribe learned to find meaning in it. The discipline of silence was not about ease but about endurance. It taught perseverance, the ability to sit with discomfort until it transformed into calm. Like a steady toll of bells, marking time, silence demanded acceptance, reminding the scribe that patience itself was a form of strength. In enduring silence, he discovered resilience. In yielding to silence, he found peace. The comfort of silence extended beyond the workroom. In the cloister walks, silence followed like a shadow, softening each step, amplifying the scent of herbs, the texture of stone beneath the hand, the cool air on the skin. In the refectory, meals were eaten in silence, allowing the taste of bread and broth to be savored without distraction, each bite a small act of mindfulness. In the gardens, silence made prayer bloom more richly, turning each word of devotion into a seed planted in the heart. Silence was not confined to one space, but was woven into the very fabric of monastic life, a constant companion in work, rest, and worship. It is easy to imagine silence as substance, as something lacking, but in the medieval cloister it was full, abundant, alive. Silence was not a void, but a canvas upon which life painted itself with clarity. It carried meaning, it offered presence, and it created an environment where even the smallest actor stroke of the quill, a footstep in a corridor, a bell's distant toll was effaced with significance. Silence, in this sense, was not passive but active. It shaped the scribe's labor, it nurtured his spirit, it defined his world. To those who lived within it, silence was not a burden but a blessing, a source of comfort as essential as light or bread. For the scribes, who labored long into the hours of the night, silence was the cloak that wrapped them, protecting their focus and softening their solitude. It was the invisibly compain that steadied their hand, calmed their mind, and reminded them of the purpose of their work. It turned the pressure of perfection into the patience of devotion, transforming the act of copying words into an act of worship. In silence, they found both discipline and peace, both challenge and comfort, both struggle and grace. And it was within this silence that the timeless treasures of their manuscripts were born, each page carrying not only words and images, but also the quiet presence of the stillness that shaped them. The story of a medieval manuscript did not conclude when the final stroke of ink dried upon parchment. In truth, the journey of the written word had only reached its midpoint. A pile of loose leaves, however carefully inscribed and illuminated, remained vulnerable. Pages could be torn, scattered by wind, or lost to careless handling. To give text its final shape, to grant it both dignity and endurance, came the process of binding. It washer, in the bookbinder's workshop, that manuscripts were transformed from fragile gatherings of vellum into volumes, capable of surviving centuries. Binding was no mere technical stage. It was the moment when words were literally held together, where ephemeral thought clothed itself in permanence. The atmosphere of a bindery was unlike the scriptorium, though both shared a quiet sense of craft, whereas the scriptorium echoed with the scritch of quills and the murmur of prayer. The bindery resonated with physical sounds, the creak of wooden presses, the gentle click of awls piercing parchment, the rhythmic pull of needles drawing linen thread through carefully measured holes. The air smelled not of ink but of leather, glue, beeswax, and polished wood. There was a tactile richness in this space, a grounding reminder that the book was not only an intellectual object, but also a physical artifact. Binding began with gathering. Sheets of parchment, written and illuminated across months, even years, were arranged into quires small booklets of folded leaves. The order was crucial, for a misplaced sheet could disrupt the flow of text. Scribes sometimes left tiny guide marks or numbers at the base of pages to help binders arrange the sequence correctly. Once organized, the quires were stacked and prepared for sewing. This was the first act of transformation. What had been many now became one. The binder threaded a strong linen cord through the folds, pulling tight, knotting firmly, ensuring that pages could not slip or scatter. Each stitch, small though it seemed, was an act of trust that knowledge would endure beyond the fragility. Often, the sewing process itself carried rhythm, almost like music. The binder worked with deliberate pace, his hand rising and falling in steady cadence. All in one hand, needle in the other, he pierced and threaded, until the quires held fast against one another. Linen was chosen because of its strength, spun from fibers of the flax plant and polished smooth with beeswax. Wax not only made the thread more pliable, but also protected it from moisture and pests. Over centuries, many bindings have loosened, boards have warped, leather has cracked, but often the waxed linen threads remain, silently testifying to the care of their makers. Once sewn, the manuscript entered the press. Here, the quires were squeezed together between heavy planks au foc au beach, forcing them flat. The creaking of the wooden press marked another step toward permanence. As pressure settled into the parchment, the text, block once pliable and shifting, became solid and unified. Pressing was not only practical, but symbolic. The binder imposed order upon disorder, turning a pile of separate leaves into a single body. The boards came next, often fashioned from seasoned oak or beech. These were cut to size and attached with strong cords, stitched into the sewn quires. The boards were thick, sometimes heavy. Forthy served as the shield of the manuscript, guarding its fragile interior against the hazards of handling and time. The smell of newly cut wood mingled with the musk of oiled hides that waited to cover them. Here the binder's work became architectural. He was not merely stitching pages, but constructing a fortress for words. Leather binding was both practical and aesthetic. Calf, sheep, or pigskin was tanned, stretched, and polished before being drawn tightly over the boards. The binder moistened the leather so that it became supple, molding it carefully to the shape of the book. As it dried, it shrank and tightened, clinging firmly to the wood. The surface was sometimes left plain, but more often decorated with blind stamp, patterns, gilded designs, or even jewels. The most precious manuscripts bore covers that rivaled the illumination within. Ivory plaques carved with biblical calcines, enameled crosses, clasps of silver or gold set with gems. But even the simplest leather cover carried its own quiet beauty, its worn grain darkening with the touch of countless hands. In the act of covering, the manuscript gained its identity. Loose leaves might have contained great wisdom, but they remained incompletuntal, clothed in leather and wood. The binding gave the book a body, something that could be held, stored, and carried. For scribes who had labored over every line, seeing their work bound was an experience of closure, a final reassurance that their efforts had not been in vain. The book, now weighty and whole, was ready to live at the workshop and enter the wider world. Mistakes, which had haunted scribes during the long months of copying, seemed less frightening in this stage. A miswritten word or smudged letter, once bound, no longer threatened to unravel the manuscript. The binding enclosed imperfections within a larger whole, softening their sting. What mattered now was not the single flawed line but the enduring volume itself. In this way, binding brought comfort, it gathered fragility and transformed it into durability. Yet binding was not only technical labor, it was a philosophy of permanence. To bind words was to declare that they mattered, that they deserved to endure. In an age before printing, every bound book represented an enormous investment of time, labor, and material. Calves were slaughtered for vellum, lapis lazuli mined in Afghanistan for pigments, months spent in transcription and illumination, and, finally, all was brought together in binding. To place a leather cover around these efforts was to acknowledge their value, to give them not only physical protection but symbolic honor. Fourth, monks and artisans of the Middle Ages, binding was also an act of devotion. To them, books were not simply objects but vessels of divine truth. Covering a gospel with leather or adorning it with jewels was a way of revering the word it contained. The very stitches, cords, and boards became offerings, as meaningful in their way as the prayers whispered in cloisters. Even the humblest bindings carried this devotion. A plain brown coverfor, a psalter, was still crafted with reverence, for within its pages dwelt the voice of the sacred. The communal aspect of binding was equally significant. Whereas the solitary scribe worked alone at his desk, the binder often collaborated with other carpenters who shaped boards, tanners who prepared hides, metal workers who fashioned clasps. A bound manuscript was thus the product of many hands, each contributing a craft. The unity of the finished book mirrored the unity of the community that had created it. In binding, words became more than personal labor. They became shared heritage. For modern readers, the sight of a medieval binding carries mystery. The cracks of old leather, the scent of time, the gleam of worn clasps, all whisper of centuries gone. Holding such a book, one feels the continuity of human care. The stitches and covers made long ago still protects words, still carry them across generations. Binding, in this sense, is not only craft but memory. It preserves not only the text but also the devotion of those who sought to preserve it. Imagine, then, the emotions of a scribe seeing his work bound for the first time. Months of solitude, of ink stains and aching hands, suddenly crystallized into a single object. Where once there were only scattered sheets, now stood a book that could be held, displayed, and passed down. The satisfaction must have been profound. A life's labor solidified, the moral captured in permanence. To bind was to finish, but also to begin, for the book was now ready to carry its message beyond the cloister walls, to teach, to inspire, to endure. Thus, binding gave closure not only to manuscripts but to the very lives of their makers. It was a reminder that work, however slow and painstaking, could result in something lasting. The calm of binding was not only in the steady rhythm of sewing and pressing but in the deeper knowledge that effort had meaning. Every knot tied, every board fitted, every leather cover stretched was a pledge to the future, that these words, these ideas, would not fade with the scribe's breath but live on, in bound form. In the end, binding was the most human of acts. It acknowledged fragility and answered with strength. It gathered scattered pieces and wove them into unity. It transformed labor into legacy. And as Thebender set down his tools, As the scribe lifted the finished volume, there was certainty. The words would last, held together by thread, leather, and time. In the quiet heart of the cloister, beyond the stone walls and the rows of desks filled with ink and parchment, lay a sanctuary of life and color, the garden. This was no ordinary patch of earth, but a carefully tended space, a living retreat from the steady labor of copying manuscripts. For the scribes, the garden offered a rhythm different from the scratch of quills or the scent of ink. Here, the mind could wander, the eyes could lift, and the body could stretch after hours of stillness. Paths of gravel wound gently between neatly arranged beds, each square of soil hosting plants, chosen not only for sustenance, but also for beauty. Lavender and rosemary perfumed the air, their soft fragrance drifting on warm breezes. Bees flitted among the blossoms, their hum subtle but persistent, like a natural accompaniment to the quiet of stone corridors. Fountains gurgled and trickled, tiny cascades of water, offering a cooling counterpoint to the dry rustle of parchment pages. Every step in the garden carried with it a gentle reminder that life existed beyond letters and ink, and that the world could be both orderly and alive. Gardens served multiple purposes. Beyond their aesthetic appeal, they were practical, providing herbs, vegetables, and medicinal plants for the community. Sage and thyme-flavored soups and breads, their leaves carefully plucked and dried. Mint leaves were added to water or tea, refreshing both body and mind. Comfrey was pressed into poultices, its healing properties, soothing minor cuts or fatigue. Even flowers were chosen for subtle utility. Calendula petals could treat the skin, chamomile flowers steeped into calming tea. Yet usefulness was never the garden's only virtue. The monks and scribes understood that beauty nurtured the spirit as much as food nurtured the body. Carefully trimmed hedges and symmetrically aligned beds mirrored the discipline of pages, offering a visual echo of the order imposed on parchment. Yet, unlike inked letters, the garden's order breathed freely, leaving space for variation, imperfection, and the gentle unpredictability of life. Walking among the plants, scribes allowed themselves moments of quiet observation. They might pause, to watch a bee land on a lavender spike, to note the way sunlight caught the edges of a rose's petals, or to observe a small worm working the soil beneath a flowering bed. In such moments, the fear of mistakes, the ever-present anxiety of smudged ink, blotched lines, or miscopied letters slipped into the background. Nature had a forgiving hand. A crooked stem, a leaf that had fallen in the night, or a patch of soil left bare did not disturb the overall harmony. In fact, it added subtle character to the garden. Here, scribes learned a lesson, unspoken but deeply felt. Imperfection could exist without harm, and beauty often resided in the unexpected. The sensory experience of the garden was rich and layered. The scent of herbs mixed with the dampness of earth, forming an aroma at once grounding and soothing. The colors were vivid, yet calm, deep greens of basil and sage, soft purples of lavender, the occasional flash of red or gold from marigolds or poppies, the gentle patterns of sunlight through tree-screeted shifting patches of warmth and shade, inviting pauses on stone benches or moss-covered walls. Birds made their own music above, the clear high notes of finches, the softer warble of thrushes, even the occasional alcove of a distant crow. All these elements combined into a tapestry of sound, scent and sight that contrasted with the uniform monotone of the scriptorium. Here, time seemed to slow even further. A single hour in the garden might stretch to encompass many more moments than an hour at a desk, not in clock time but in the fullness of attention. Gardens were also spaces of contemplation. Scribes might walk slowly between beds, meditating on words they had copied or the illumination they planned. Some paused to sketch small studies of plants or flowers on scraps of parchment, practicing shapes and lines before returning to their manuscripts. Others knelt to on soil or prune leaves, simple physical acts that mirrored the mental discipline of their work. The repetitive nature of gardening, the patter of watering, the careful spacing of seedlings, the trimming of overgrown stems created its own rhythm, one that harmonized with the more cerebral cadence of writing. In both acts, precision mattered, yet there was room for flexibility, a recognition that life could not always be fully controlled. Mistakes in the garden were small and instructive. A seed planted too close to another taught spacing, a wilted leaf minded of the need for attention. Such lessons translated naturally back to the scriptorium, where patience and careful observation were equally essential. In the quiet of these green spaces, scribes encountered subtle emotional nourishment. The act of walking along garden paths allowed the mind to wander gently from task to task, from word to word, without urgency. Each inhalation carried the fragrances of rosemary, sage, or thyme. Each exhalation seemed to release tension accumulated from hours of concentrated work. The body, often cramped from sitting at a desk, found relief in movement. Muscles stretched, joints loosened, and the mind relaxed in tandem. Bird songs became punctuation in the day, while the gentle trickle of water offered a steady metronome. Forethought. Here, in the shade of an arbor or under the warm sun, the scribe could allow small joys to emerge. The discovery of a new flower in bloom, the soft hum of bees, the simple satisfaction of a path neatly raked. Gardens also offered a subtle lesson in humility and acceptance. Whereas manuscripts demanded affection, the natural world accepted imperfection gracefully. A bent stem was not corrected but allowed to flourish in its own way. Fallen leaves were not lamented but appreciated as part of the cycle of life. This tolerance was a model for scribes, reminding them that mistakes in their own work, while to be learned from, need not carry despair. There was a gentle metaphor here. Just as the garden thrived despite minor flaws, so could a manuscript remain beautiful despite small errors. Nature's acceptance provided comfort, a subpleasure that balance and harmony could be maintained, without absolute control. In addition to sensory pleasure and contemplation, gardens encouraged social quietude and gentle community. Scribes might walk together in silence, exchanging no words, yet sharing presence. In these moments, camaraderie was expressed not in conversation but in parallel action, to hands pruning, a pair of eyes watching the same flower, a shared appreciation of sunlight glinting off a dew-covered leaf. The communal aspect of gardening mirrored the collaborative spirit of the scriptorium. Just as one scribe's careful work supported the collective manuscript, one of gardener's tending supported the flourishing of the whole. Silence, observation, and care intertwined, fostering a sense of belonging without demanding speech. Seasons made their presence known vividly in the cloister garden. Spring brought tender green shoots and the scent of damp earth after rain. Summer offered abundant growth and long days of light. Autumn painted leaves in shades of amber and gold, marking time with the harvest. Winter pressed life inward, leaving skeletal stems and the promise of renewal beneath frost. Each season a quiet lesson to the scribe. Growth takes time, beauty changes, and patience is rewarded. Observing these cycles nurtured perspective. The rhythm of the garden reinforced the rhythm of work. Just as plants moved at their own pace, so too did letters form and manuscripts progress, guided by careful, patient hands. Even mundane tasks in the garden contributed to calm. Watering plants, turning soil, and removing weeds were appetitive but soothing. The motions became almost meditative, allowing the mind to drift without losing focus entirely. In this meditative state, creativity often flourished. Ideas for illuminations, marginalia, or textual flourishes sometimes emerged spontaneously, inspired by shapes of leaves, the pattern of petals, or the flight of birds. The garden was a subtle teacher, offering lessons in composition, balance, and harmony that complemented lessons learned at the desk. As afternoon light softened into evening, the garden's interlude offered a gentle transition back into work. Scribes could return to the scriptorium refreshed, their eyes restored from hours of leafy observation, their minds calmed by the steady rhythm of footsteps and water. Ink flowed more smoothly, lines of text were formed with renewed care, and errors became less frequent. In this sense, Erred was both a literal and metaphorical space of restoration. It balanced labor with leisure, discipline with gentle freedom, and precision with acceptance. Ultimately, the garden was a quiet testament to the human need for both work and respite. It reminded scribes that life existed beyond the constraints of quill and ink, that beauty could be found without obligation, and that imperfection could coexist with purpose. By stepping into its paths, inhaling fragrant air, listening to birds, and watching water ripple over stone, scribes encountered not only a space of calm but a philosophy. Patience, observation, and acceptance could guide both their hands and their hearts. In the garden's interludes, work was contextualized within the larger rhythm of life. Mistakes were softened by perspective, and the day, like a well-tended plot of soil, yielded rewards in quiet abundance. When the hush of the cloister deepened, silence did not remain unbroken for long. In the medieval scriptorium, the quiet was often replaced by the soft, rolling cadence of chant. Gregorian hymns, measured and deliberate, rose in gentle waves, filling the arches and stone corridors of chapels and cloisters. The voices were never hurried, they flowed steadily, weaving together in harmonies that seemed both human and otherworldly. Each note was deliberate, each phrase drawn out with care, carrying the listener into a tranquil space where the chants did not assault the senses. Instead, they enveloped them like a warm blanket, a steady comfort that both soothed and inspired. For scribes who had spent long hours bent over parchment, their eyes tracing minute letters, the chant offered relief. The low hum of voices, mingling with occasional bursts of higher tones, created a rhythm that mirrored the slow scratch of quills, providing a gentle backdrop against which fatigue could fade. Scribes listened with rapt attention, but not in the way of study. Rather, the chant waves experienced his presence. The sound did not demand comprehension, only attention. Each wave of melody carried the mind away from the meticulous task of copying text, offering a pause, a subtle rest for overworked eyes and hands. Mistakes that had earlier seemed monumental, an errant stroke, a blot of ink, now shrank into insignificance. In the presence of chant, the weight of human imperfection felt lighter. Each note was a reassurance that some things endure beyond the transient concerns of the day, that the human voice could carry both devotion and comfort across spaces, echoing through stone and air alike. The chants themselves were composed with precision and care. Monks had developed these melodies over generations, carefully balancing repetition and variation. Each chant began with a slow introduction, notes held deliberately, allowing the mind to settle, patterns repeated, offering predictability and order, but slight variations arising interval here, a pause there kept the music alive. For scribes attuned to rhythm, these variations were akin to minute adjustments made with a quill. Just as one might pause before a particularly difficult letter or elimination, so did the chant pause, giving space to breathe and reflect. There was harmony between sound and silence, between motion and stillness, that offered a kind of meditative cadence, one that could soften the sharp edges of attention and soothe the tension of extended focus. Chant was more than a background for work. It was a guide to the inner life of the cloister. Its measured pace mirrored the rhythm of daily routine. The bells that marked canonical hours had already structured the day, but chant added a second layer of temporal awareness. It was not urgency that drove this rhythm, but gentle order, an echo of the pattern found in the careful alignment of text on parchment. The repetition of notes and phrases reinforced mental discipline, fostering patience and attention to detail. Just as scribes returned to their quills with steady hands, they returned to the chant with receptive minds. Each cycle of melody offering a renewed sense of focus and calm. Participating in, or harinkan, also brought the scribes into a communal rhythm. Even those who did not sing were part of a shared experience, feeling their own labor reflected in the patience and dedication of the choir. Each voice, rising and falling in harmony with others, created a tapestry of sound that embraced all who listened. The isolation of copying text alone was softened by this collective presence. Mistakes made earlier in the day seemed less in comparison to the steady flow of music, and even the act of writing itself felt integrated into a larger, timeless pattern. The chant reminded the scribe that work was not solitary, that human effort connected to tradition, devotion, and shared care. The spatial qualities of the cloister enhanced the effect of the chant. High ceilings and stone arches allowed sound to linger and blend, producing a gentle echo that seemed to extend beyond physical space. The resonance created a sense of expansiveness, even within confined rooms, carrying voices far and wide while maintaining intimacy. Listeners were wrapped in waves of sound, the notes bouncing softly against walls, mingling with the occasional drip of water from a cloister gutter or the distant flutter of a bird's wings. This acoustic environment allowed chant to both calm and inspire, creating a space where physical surroundings and sound merged into a holistic experience. Chant also connected the present to the past. Every melody carried centuries of devotion, repetition, and refinement. Monks who had lived long before had sung the same notes, their voices echoing across time through manuscript, memory, and tradition. Scribes, aware of this continuity, found both comfort and inspiration in the knowledge that their work was part of a lineage far larger than their immediate tasks. Mistakes in copying, while real and feared, were situated within a broader context. Imperfection was human, but effort and devotion endured. The chant reminded them that education mattered as much as flawlessness, that even a small act of labor participated in the continuity of spiritual and cultural life. The relationship between writing and chant was intimate and subtle. As scribes traced letters across parchment, they often internalized the rhythm of song. Each line of text could be imagined as a melodic phrase. Each illuminated initial might reflect a flourish in the melody. The discipline of writing, careful, repetitive, precise, found a kind of mirror in the discipline of chanting. Both acts required patience, steady focus, and an awareness of time passing. In this way, the scriptorium and the chapel were connected. The movement of quill and the rise of human voice complemented one another, each enhancing concentration, skill, and emotional balance. The physical experience of listening to chant was also deeply calming. The steady vibration of sound, resonating through chest and ear, induced a kind of somatic relaxation. Shoulders lowered, breathing slowed, and heartbeat became synchronized with the gentle rise and fall of melody. Scribes, often tense from hours of precise handwork, felt muscles release, minds calm, and eyes rest. In this state, mistakes lost urgency, and the act of creation became lighter, more fluid. The chant provided a slow, predictable rhythm, offering reassurance that the day's labor would continue steadily, and that care taken now would be Chant also carried a subtle emotional education. The melodies were designed to evoke reverence, patience, humility, and reflection. Scribes learned to match the qualities of the song in their own approach to work. Careful attention, gentle correction of errors, and a quiet sense of continuity. Listening to the layers of voice intertwining in harmony offered a lesson in patience, balance, and attentiveness. Mistakes in writing became microcosms of imperfection in life, correctable and small within the broader pattern of effort and devotion. This song served as both example and accompaniment, teaching emotional resilience while soothing the mind. Even the visual environment reinforced the calming effect of chant. Soft candlelight or early morning sunlight streaming through colored glass reflected faintly on parchment and stone, complementing the auditory experience. Shadows shifted slowly across desks and walls, mimicking the gentle rise and fall of notes in the air. Quills scratched softly, aligning their rhythm with the resonance of voices. The sensory integration, sound, sight, and touch produced a deep sense of immersion, drawing scribes into the moment fully, while reducing anxiety over errors or lapses. As the day progressed, chant offered subtle markers of time. Lengthy and accompany extended work sessions, while shorter responses indicated transitions. Each musical movement guided attention, providing structure without the abruptness of bells or mechanical measures. In this way, chant functioned both as art and as practical support, offering a gentle framework for focus. Even when the scribe returned to writing in the quiet of the scriptorium, the memory of melody lingered, influencing pacing and steadiness, softening the pressure of accuracy into a rhythm of care. The communal dimension of chant reinforced the cultural and spiritual value of manuscripts. Each note sung tied the scribe's labor to worship, to tradition, and to shared human effort. Their meticulous transcription of texts and illumination of letters resonate with the devotion expressed in song. Mistakes in copying, once isolated and personal, became small within the vast fabric of collective practice. The chant reminded scribes that their work mattered not only to themselves, but to a lineage of readers, worshippers, and scholars, providing perspective and reducing fear of error. Even brief pauses in chant were significant. Moments of silence between phrases offered reflection, allowing thoughts to set mistakes to be reconsidered, and focus to return. These pauses echoed the pauses inherent in writing, stopping before a difficult letter, considering a word's placement, or planning an illuminated initial. In this way, the structure of chant mirrored the structure of labor, teaching patience and measured attention. Each rise and fall in melody was an embodied lesson in rhythm and care. Finally, the day's end brought the full effect of chant into as voices tapered, echoing against vaulted ceilings. Scribes returned to their work with a calm clarity. The experience left an impression not only in mind but in body. Hands steadier, posture relaxed, breathing slow and rhythmic. Mistakes felt Smaller, the act of writing gentler, the world outside the cloister softened by hours of measured song, chant, with its enduring pat. Even in the silent, cool rooms of the medieval scriptorium, scribes were seldom entirely alone. Their days, marked by the scratch of quills, the gentle rustle of parchment, and the measured tolling of bells, often included quiet companionship of animals. Cats, in particular, were frequent and welcome guests. Small, agile, and attentive, they moved like shadows across stone floors, their soft paw steps barely audible above the murmur of work. They curled on benches or on sunlit patches of floor, offering warmth and comfort, their rhythmic purring blending into the hum of concentration. These cats were not only companions but also protectors, keeping at bay the persistent threat of mice and other small vermin who might nibble at precious parchment, bindings, or scribellum. Their presence was calming, a living reassurance that the scriptorium's order could be maintained in both labor and domestic harmony. The gentle heat of a cat's body, the occasional soft brush of fur against a hand, provided tactile comfort in a place dominated by cold stone, ink, and the precise movement of quills. Mice, though less welcome than cats, were also part of the fabric of life within the cloister. These tiny creatures, quickened, furtive, appeared unpredictably, reminding scribes that the world beyond the page had its own rhythms, and, while they threatened manuscripts by nibbling on edges or probing the folds of rolled parchment, their scurrying also became a quiet, almost musical element in the otherwise still environment. Scribes learned to anticipate their movements, moving carefully to protect their work while observing, almost admiring, the resilience and persistence of these small intruders. In this way, mice served as subtle teachers. Their presence reminded scribes of the fragility of all effort, that each page, each letter, required both skill and vigilance. The interplay of predator and prey, the cat guarding against the mouse, aid a small but comforting balance to daily life, demonstrating the gentle order inherent in nature. Beyond cats and mice, other animals often wandered into or around the cloister. Sparrows, small and nimble, sometimes slipped through open windows, perching on ledges or investigating warm sunbeams. Their cheerful chirping became part of the ambient soundscape, a tiny celebration of life beyond stone walls and ink-stained fingers. Bees, escaping from the garden, occasionally hemmed past manuscripts, adding a brief, curious motion to otherwise static days. The sight of dogs padding through courtyards, their coats glinting in sunlight, or stirring leaves beneath ancient trees, created further connection to the world outside. Each animal, in its own small way, grounded scribes in the larger rhythms of life, the movement of wind through leaves, the soft scattering of petals, the living pulse that existed beyond paper and ink. The presence of animals had practical benefits, of course, but their influence went beyond utility. A cat nestled by a scribe's side could reduce the stress of long hours, providing warmth and a subtle tactile connection to the present moment. A sparrow's song or the faint buzz of a bee reminded scribes that life continued in gentle harmony outside their own tasks. Even the occasional frustration, a mouse nibbling at the corner of a precious folio, was tempered by the broader lessons of patience, resilience, and observation. Animals introduced elements of unpredictability, requiring awareness without demanding immediate correction, much like the slow learning of a complex manuscript. In this way, they fostered mindfulness and presence, softening anxiety over potential errors. Cats, in particular, developed a unique relationship with scribes over time. Some were entirely independent, weaving in and out of benches and alcoves, content merely to be near through warmth of humans and stone. Others were attentive, sensing the rhythm of work and settling precisely where they could offer comfort without disruption. Scribes often welcomed the weight of a cat resting across their knees, or the light brush of fur against an arm, as these moments punctuated their labor with quiet companionship. The soft purring of a cat, continuous yet unobtrusive, mirrored the rhythm of quills, offering a counterpoint to the fine scratches of ink on parchment. In these moments, the fear of mistakes seemed less severe. The scribe's focus was still present, but tempered by a sense of shared existence with another living. Mice, for all their trouble, added vitality to the scriptorium in a subtler way. Their movements were unpredictable, darting along shelves, investigating nooks, or weaving beneath benches. Scribes learned to anticipate these small interruptions, responding with a calm attentiveness rather than alarm. In watching these creatures, there was an implicit lesson about the fleeting and fragile nature of their own labor. Just as a mouse could nibble at parchment in an instant, so too could a careless stroke of the quill create imperfection. Yet, unlike human reactions, the mouse's interference was not judgmental. It simply existed, and the scribe could choose to respond with patience rather than panic. In this, the scriptorium became a place where observation, understanding, and gentle adaptation were part of daily routine. The garden and courtyard surrounding the cloister often hosted additional creatures, reinforcing the connection between scribe and environment. Birds of various kinds provided melodic punctuation to the day, finches with their high, clear notes, thrushes with gentle warbles, and doves offering soft cooing in rhythmic intervals. These sounds, both varied and predictable, became in the sensory experience of writing. Bees, with their purposeful humming, reminded scribes of diligence and persistence, working tirelessly from flower to flower. Dogs, whether accompanying gardeners or wandering quietly in the sunlit courtyards, embodied a grounded presence, linking human activity to larger patterns of life and care. All these small companions encouraged attention, patience, and observation, key qualities in avoiding mistakes while copying texts. Animals also contributed to the emotional texture of their unpredictability introduced moments of surprise, amusement, and delight, softening the often rigid atmosphere of intense focus. A cat curling suddenly into a sleeping scribe's lap could provoke a quiet laugh, a gentle smile. A bird hopping onto a windowsill brought brief fascination, interrupting repetitive labor with. Even the challenge of a mouse invasion became an opportunity to practice calmness, measured dress tones, and adaptability. Through these interactions, scribes learned that life and labor were intertwined. Imperfection and surprise were natural, and emotional steadiness could be cultivated alongside technical skill. The tactile experience of animals was particularly grounding. Cat's warmth, the smoothness of a dog's coat, the light weight of a bird perched nearby, each offered sensory feedback that anchored attention to the presentment. Scribes often allowed themselves to pause, brushing a cat's fur or observing a bird's wing, letting the simple act of touch and observation reset mental tension. In these interactions, mistakes lost their magnitude. The body and mind experienced gentle reassurance that life, beyond the task at hand, persisted with grace. Grounding was essential, especially in long days dominated by detailed work, when fatigue and concentration cowed, otherwise magnify errors and anxiety. Even animals' indirect contributions mattered. The presence of cats controlling rodent populations preserved manuscripts and bound materials, reducing potential material loss and providing security. Bees pollinated garden herbs that later nourished the community, linking the work of Scribesto, the cycles of nature. Birds and small mammals enriched the ambient soundscape, offering variation and texture to the scriptorium's acoustic environment. Every interaction, whether immediate or indirect, created an ecosystem in which work, life, and observation blended, reducing the sense of isolation that could intensify fear of mistakes. For the scribe, these creatures were also reminders of humility. While a perfectly copied manuscript was a human achievement, the small, often unpredictable interventions of animals demonstrated that not all outcomes could be controlled. Cats might settle inconveniently on a fresh page, mice might nibble the edge of a folio, and sparrows might scatter near an open window. Each event required flexibility, patience, and recognition that perfection was an ideal rather than an absolute. By observing and adapting to the rhythms of animal companions, scribes honed emotional resilience alongside technical precision, softening the psychological weight of potential errors. Animals further enriched the aesthetic experience of the scriptorium. Their movements, sounds, and interactions provided contrast to the careful, measured lines of ink. The subtle witch of a cat's tail, the shimmer of a bird's wing, or the light scurry of a mouse across stone offered dynamic counterpoints to static letters and pages. In this way, the presence of animals was a living accompaniment to third of manuscript creation, adding texture, rhythm, and vitality to what might otherwise be a silent and austere environment. Even at night, when lanterns cast flickering shadows across benches, animals played their part. Cats slept curled beside warm fires, their rhythmic breathing a comfort against the quiet of dark stone. Mice continued their soft, furtive wanderings, largely unseen but sensed, reinforcing attentiveness. Birds had roosted, but their earlier songs lingered in memory, a soothing echo for tired minds. Dogs rested in courtyards, their soft snores punctuating the stillness. In this nocturnal calm, scribes felt continuity. The day's work, the natural rhythms of life, and the presence of companions all merged into a slow. In the quiet rooms of medieval scriptoria, time unfolded differently than it does in the hurried modern world. Days were not measured by moments alone, but by the careful accumulation of work, the completion of a single parchment leaf, the finishing of a decorated initial, the gradual growth of a manuscript's body from empty pagesto, fully formed text. For scribes, each day was a meditation on patience, each stroke of the quill a deliberate act in a long continuum that stretched beyond a single life. The slow passage of time was as tangible as the weight of the parchment beneath their hands, or the faint scent of beeswax and ink in the air. This measured rhythm brought with it a duality of feeling, the potential for anxiety, as every small mistake could undo hours of labor, and the quiet reassurance that progress, however gradual, was inevitable. Scribes learned to treat the days as companions, to move with them gently, to accept the cadence of life and work without haste, and to recognize that each moment of concentrated effort contributed to something far greater than immediate perception. Though the process of manuscript creation was inherently slow, with each step demanding attention, care, and thoughtfulness. Parchment had to be prepared and tested, ink mixed to the right consistency, quills cut and shaped for optimal writing. Each letter, even the simplest of strokes, required steadiness and focus. A minor slip could mar the perfection of a page, but over time, scribes learned that errors were not endpoints. They were small disturbances in a larger, ongoing flow. Correction, concealment, or careful adjustment allowed the work to reminding the scribe that patience was the most powerful tool in their repertoire. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Yet the slow, deliberate pace became a comforting constant, a rhythm that carried them through uncertainty and fatigue alike. Seasonal change was one of the most visible markers after time's passage within the scriptorium. Winter brought dim light, long shadows, and a chill that seeped into stone walls. Hands numbed against cold, ink thickened sluggishly, and mistakes seemed more likely, yet the very slowness of winter instilled caution and mindfulness. Summer, by contrast, stretched light across windowsills, warming stone floors, and allowing ink to dry quickly, quills to move fluidly, and colors to reveal themselves fully in illumination. Spring arrived with the gentle patter of rain on roof, tiles, the fresh scent of earth and herbs drifting through open windows, and a sense of renewal that inspired longer hours of thoughtful work. Autumn painted courtyards and cloisters with swirling leaves, red and gold, a reflection of pigments ground and applied with care upon the pages. Each season left its subtle imprint upon the manuscript, not only in tangible ways but in the rhythm, pace, and tone of the scribe's labor. The slow passage of time became woven into every line, every stroke, every careful embellishment. With such gradual accumulation, the concept of error shifted in perception. Early on, a scribe might fret at the sight of a blot or misaligned letter, fearing that all preceding effort had been for naught. Yet over months of careful repetition, these small imperfections were contextualized within larger work. One blot did not diminish the life of an entire manuscript. One imperfect line could be revised or accurately incorporated into margins. Time, flowing steadily forward, provided a forgiving framework. Each completed page, each chapter finished over weeks or months, was a testament to endurance. Mistakes became part of the manuscript's story, reminders of human presence and devotion. They did not erase the journey, nor did they cancel the lessons learned. In this way, the slow passage of time softened the sting of error, teaching patience as a natural counterbalance to perfectionism. The day-to-day experience of slow, deliberate work was itself a meditation. Morning began with the gentle toll of bells, calling scribes to prayer and reflection before setting quills to parchment. The air in the scriptorium carried the scent of old books, stone, and wax, a sensory constancy that marked the hours without urgency. Hands moved steadily, often in synchrony with other scribes, creating a soft chorus of quills scratching across vellum. Breaks were measured by bell or ritual rather than whim, and every movement laying down a page, adjusting ink, grinding pigments was performed with care. Even mundane actions became meaningful, small anchors in the river of time, the steady passage of dissolute scribes to cultivate calm, to observe their own rhythms, and to integrate the inevitability of imperfection into a larger, patient understanding of work and life. Over weeks and months, manuscripts themselves became mirrors of time's passage. Initial pages, carefully drawn and written in the first months, were lighter, more attentive, reflecting both freshness and caution. Later pages showed confidence, the flow of hand and mint synchronized with long experience, illumination deepened with skill, colors blended with greater subtlety, and margins began to carry small decorative flourishes that revealed the scribe's growing familiarity with material, and each manuscript, therefore, was not just a collection of words, but a living record of months and years, a chronicle of patience and attention. The slow passage of time embedded itself into the object, marking both a story and human experience, with gentle, deliberate care. Beyond the physical manuscript, the slow rhythm of work shaped the scribe's internal world. Anxiety about error, fatigue, and attention fluctuated naturally, but each day's passage reinforced resilience. Time became a silent teacher, reminding scribes that mastery could not be rushed. The repetition of motion, the careful observation of ink and parchment, the gradual development of skill, these were rewards in themselves. Mistakes, once feared as immediate disasters, were reframed within the ongoing continuum of effort. Time allowed perspective, turning fleeting errors into minor notes in a symphony of continuous, careful labor. Each completed page, each corrected error, each mindful stroke of quill contributed to a sense of accomplishment that unfolded as slowly as the days themselves. The scriptorium, in its slow cadence, offered a rare kind of security. Stone walls, high windows, and the constancy of bell tolls created a safe environment where work could proceed without the chaos of external distractions. The deliberate passage of time gave each scribe the opportunity to move thoughtfully, to observe the nuances of ink, parchment, and illumination. Mistakes were noticeable, yes, but they existed within a system that valued patience and rapid output. In this environment, the fear of error diminished, replaced by a calm understanding that time, when honored, carried its own reassurance. Even the smallest tasks reflected this long view. Shaping a quill, mixing ink, or smoothing parchment could occupy minutes or hours, each action requiring attention but all offering meditative solace. The repetition was comforting, like the slow ebb and flow of a river. Minor frustrations, ink that ran too thick, pigments that dried unevenly, were softened by the understanding that tomorrow, and the day after, and the months to come, offered another opportunity to proceed with care. The slow passage of time was thus intertwined with the scribe's sense of control and mastery, creating a gentle rhythm that carried them through the seasons of work and life. Seasons, indeed, were reminders of the persistence inherent in slow work. A year marked by winter, spring, summer, and autumn created natural intervals, encouraging reflection and adaptation. Snow might slow progress, but it also sharpened focus, as scribes moved carefully by candlelight and warmed hands at fires. Spring rains brought a refreshing clarity, encouraging longer hours and more detailed work. Summer light allowed pigments to shine, quills to move effortlessly, and eyes to rest with occasional gaze toward sunlit gardens. Autumn's turning leaves mirrored the gradual accumulation of knowledge and skill, the slow layering of achievement and insight. Through these cycles, the scribe's work was continuously informed by the passage of time, embedding patience, rhythm, and acceptance into both mind and manuscript. Even the notion of mistakes was softened by time. A misplaced letter, a blot, or a smudge could no longer dominate the scribe's attention. Viewed over months, these small flaws became minor notes in a larger symphony of accomplishment. Time reframed the perspective. A single imperfection did not erase months of labor. Each manuscript, after all, was a record of human dedication extended over months or years. In seeing this, scribes developed resilience, learning to approach work with gentleness, mindfulness, and the understanding that perfection was a long, patient journey rather than an immediate necessity. In the quietest moments, scribes might pause to observe the passing light across stone floors or parchment, noticing the subtle change in tone as the day progressed. Shadows shifted slowly, ink glistened differently, and pages reflected subtle variations in sunlight. These small details anchored attention in the present, while reminding scribes fatal work was part of a continuum. The slow movement of time, reflected in both environment and labor, created a calming awareness. Work could be deliberate, errors were survivable, and patience was itself a virtue. Cultivate through observation, repetition, and care. By the end of the year, a single manuscript often carried within its leaves the echoes of countless hours, days, and months. Its pages bore witness not only to words, illustrations, and colors, but to the gradual evolution of skill, focus, and temperament. The passage of time was etched into the work itself, visible in the quiet cloisters of medieval scriptoria. The end of a manuscript was not marked by fanfare or applause. Instead, it was recognized in the subtle shifting of parchment, the soft closing of a wooden press, the faint scent of ink lingering in the air. Completion brought a mixture of relief and reverence. For months, perhaps years, a scribe's life had been woven into every line, every stroke, every carefully drawn letter. Mistakes had been feared, each blot or slip examined with careful scrutiny. Yet with the passage of time, these small imperfections seemed to soften, to blend into the rhythm of the work itself. Each page, each folio, became a record not only of words, but of patience, persistence, and quiet dedication. Time itself was the scribe's ally, guiding hand and mind alike, shaping both the text and the human who labored over it. The manuscript, once complete, took on a life of its own, bound with leather, stitched with linen thread, pressed flat and firm. It became a vessel for the scribes. The weight of pages in hand was both physical and symbolic, a tangible reminder of the hours spent in quiet labor. Ink, once fluid and prone to smudging, had dried to permanence, transforming fragile parchment into enduring knowledge. Margins that had been decorated with delicate marginalia, playful or solemn, remained as echoes of the scribe's imagination, gentle reminders of humanity behind the work. Every book carried not just its text, but a record of devotion, a testimony to the careful rhythm of life measured in quill strokes and candlelight. As the manuscript moved beyond the scriptorium, it became part of a larger world. Shelves in monasteries or private collections cradled volumes, their spines lined neatly, their presence steady. Scholars would later open these pages, their fingers brushing against vellum, tracing letters that had been formed centuries earlier. The scribe's hands, long silent, seemed to echo in the careful spacing, the gentle curvature of letters, the steady flow of ink along margins. Mistakes, once feared with intensity, were nearly invisible to the eyes of those who read. Later, the permanence of the work softened anxiety. The legacy of effort outweighed the weight of error. In this way, the scribe's labor, calm and deliberate, reached far beyond the walls in which it had begun, touching minds and hearts across time and space. Even the simplest manuscripts carried profound significance. A book of prayers, a collection of hymns, a ledger of accounts reflected not only its content, but the long hours, the steady hands, and the patient attention of the scribe. Mistakes became minor, almost imperceptible, when seen in the context of human dedication stretched over weeks and months. The labor of the scribe was not performed for recognition or reward, but from a sense of duty and devotion. This quiet commitment, imbued through work with enduring strength, so that centuries later, the legacy of ink remained as a silent, steady testimony, to discipline and care of those who had labored long before modern eyes could read their words. The legacy extended beyond the manuscript itself. Techniques, tools, and practices passed from master to apprentice, each generation, building on the knowledge of the previous. The art of cutting quills, preparing parchment, mixing pigments, illuminating letters all became a shared tradition, linking individuals across decades and even as materials aged and inks faded slightly. The rhythm of learning, the discipline of patience, and the respect for permanence were preserved in the culture of writing. Every line copied, every page illuminated, contributed not just to a single book, but to a living chain of human memory and craft, a quiet testament to the enduring passage of time and care. Scribes often worked without immediate audience or applause. Their labor was solitary, punctuated by bells, chants, and the soft scratching of quills. Yet the fruits of their work would outlast them, a gift to readers they would never meet. The fear of mistakes, so potent during creation, diminished don'ts, the manuscript was complete. The permanence of ink, the strength of bound parchment, and the careful organization of text reassured the scribe that their efforts were not fleeting. What had once been a fragile series of handwritten pages became a tangible, resilient artifact, able to survive centuries. In this transformation, patience was validated, diligence rewarded, and the quiet power of calm, steady work was confirmed. The legacy of ink was not loud or ostentatious. It was subtle, like the flickering of a candle at dusk, or the slow turn of a page in a silent library. Scribes did not create history with fanfare. They created it through repetition, attention, and persistence. Each quill stroke was a deliberate act, each careful margin a reflection of mindfulness. Even playful marginalia, or doodles, or miniature figures reflected a scribe's humanity. Their presence, a quiet commentary on life within the walls of the scriptorium. Mistakes, once sources of tension, were absorbed into this calm, reminders that human hands and minds, though imperfect, could create beauty that endured. Beyond this, practical and artistic, manuscripts carried memory. They recorded prayers, chronicles, laws, and wisdom, preserving thoughts and knowledge for generations yet to come. When a scribe completed a book, they were contributing to a network of human understanding that would ripple across time. Errors that seemed significant in the moment became invisible or instructive. Minor adjustments in a larger framework of learning. The longevity of the manuscript, its ability to outlast the human lifespan, gave the act of writing a sacred weight. The scribe's presence was embedded within the work, preserved through careful repetition, measured pace, and the disciplined passage of time. Light and environment played subtle roles in reinforcing this legacy. Lanterns and candles diffused through stained glass or along stone walls highlighted the scribe's workspace in warm, gentle tones. Shadows shifted slowly across benches, tracing the movement of hours, while sunlight through narrow windows marked the passage of days and seasons. The physical environment, combined with the deliberate pace of labor, fostered mindfulness and minimized errors. Over time, the rhythm of light and shadow, combined with disciplined cadence of quill on parchment, allowed manuscripts to take shape slowly, thoughtfully, and beautifully. Each completed work, therefore, was a product of human effort, harmonized with time and environment, an enduring artifact of calm diligence. The act of creation, repeated over months or years, taught scribes lessons beyond the technical. Patience became second nature. The fear of mistakes was tempered by perspective. Focus developed into deep observation, and mindfulness extended beyond work into life. Each page, each folio, each carefully bound volume reflected these internalized qualities, making the manuscript not just a container of words, but a mirror of the human experience within the scriptorium. In this way, manuscripts were more than repositories of knowledge. They were embodiments of a way of life, quiet and deliberate, where errors were softened by endurance and patience, and beauty emerged from calm persistence. When passed on to other hands, monks, scholars, or custodians, they carried traces of their creators. Subtle irregularities, tiny corrections, the gentle curving of letters, and small illustrations revealed the rhythm, skill, and attention of the scribe. These physical traces of human presence, so minor in the grand scheme of time, became the soul of the work. They reminded future readers that knowledge is not born in haste, but cultivated patiently over years. Mistakes faded into insignificance, while the care embedded in every page stood as a testament to deliberate, sustained effort. As centuries unfolded, manuscripts became even more precious. Wars, fires, and the erosion of time could not erase them entirely. Libraries preserved volumes with careful hands. Collectors revered them for their beauty in history. Scribes' work, once fragile, was now resilient. Their labor, disciplined and mindful, had transcended individual lifespan. Each completed book was a bridge across time, linking the quietness of the scribe to readers and scholars who might never know the original author, yet would benefit from the steady flow of knowledge, devotion, and care inscribed within. The legacy of ink, therefore, was both practically and poetic. Practically, it preserved language, culture, and instruction. Poetically, it reflected human patience, endurance, and calm attention to detail. Mistakes, though feared in the moment, were softened by longevity, absorbed into a larger narrative of growth and continuity. The manuscript itself became a living artifact, carrying forward the quiet values of the scriptorium: diligence, mindfulness, respect for time, and reverence for knowledge. Scribes, through their careful labor, ensured that the intangible qualities of patience and devotion could be felt centuries after their quills had fallen silent. Finally, as the scribe placed the completed manuscript on a shelf or in a cabinet, there was a profound sense of fulfillment. The work, once fragile and fleeting, now had permanence. The meticulous attention to detail, the careful avoidance of error, and the slow, deliberate unfolding of time were all embodied in the volume before them. The scribe's labor, while quiet and solitary, had produced something enduring. Mistakes were now just memories, softened and absorbed by the rhythm of creation and the slow passage of time. What remained was a book that could speak to generations, a calm and steady legacy of think and human patience. The candle burned low, casting a warm glow across the scriptorium as shadows lengthened and night settled in. Lanterns dimmed one by one. Outside wind. As the candlelight flickers low and shadows stretch long across the cool stone floors, the day drifts quietly toward its gentle close. In the medieval scriptorium, the world feels both distant and familiar, a place where patience shapes each motion, where silence carries weight, and where the soft rhythm of quills across parchment becomes a meditation in itself. Every page held more than letters or words, it held intention, discipline, and quiet devotion. Each carefully drawn stroke was a small act of reverence, a tribute to knowledge, and a subtle defiance of the transience of life. Mistakes, though ever present in the mind of the scribe, were tempered by the serenity of the space and the rhythm of daily labor. They existed, but they did not dominate. The care and attention woven into each manuscript became a bridge across centuries, preserving thought, culture, and memory that would otherwise have been lost to the quiet erosion of time. Imagine the scriptorium now, emptied of its scribes, their desks bare and inkpots closed, lanterns flickering low with curling wisps of smoke. Outside, mist drifts gently along the arches and cobblestones, brushing softly against the riverbanks, while stars sprinkle the sky with quiet brilliance. The scent of old parchment, beeswax, and faint wood smoke lingers, a delicate reminder of the day's devotion. The air holds a hushed reverence, broken only by the faint sound of the river, whispering through the cloisters. In that stillness, we sense the heartbeat of the scribe's labor, the invisible pulse of countless hours spent in patient focus, the quiet victories of perfectly formed letters, the gentle triumphs over fatigue and distraction. The scribe's world was a testament to the enduring power of slow, deliberate action. Bells had measured the day, guiding work, prayer, and rest. While the seasons shaped each moment of labor, summer light streamed through open windows, illuminating golden ink and vibrant pigments, while winter chill drew the scribe closer to candlelight. Every page a small flame of persistence against the encroaching darkness. In this careful balance of light, time, and ritual, the fear of mistakes was softened, transformed into. The scribe learned to move in harmony with each rhythm, breathing with the sway of quills, listening to the faint whisper of turning pages, noticing the gentle play of shadows cast by lanterns, feeling the warmth of the candle against cool stone. Even in the quiet moments, there was life. Cats wandered among benches, curling into soft circles of warmth, while birds tapped gently at windows, or songs of sparrows drifted through open shutters. Bees from the garden hummed faintly in the distance. These small companions reminded the scribe that life extended beyond parchment, that imperfection and playfulness were woven into existentia's care and devotion. Marginalia, those tiny whimsical drawings in the corners of manuscripts, whispered of imagination and humor. Rabbits, dragons, flowers, and faces peeked from the edges of sacred texts, proving that, even in the most disciplined labor, joy and humanity had their place. In the quiet of night, we can imagine Ethis manuscripts resting, each page a testament to human patience and thought. Bound carefully with leather and thread, the books carried the labor of months and years, their weight solid and reassuring. A single smudgy or misplaced letter seemed insignificant against the totality of effort, absorbed into the enduring beauty of the work. The legacy of these scribes was not loud or grandiose. It was subtle, quiet, yet profoundly lasting. It was a legacy measured in perseverance, in the courage to labor without immediate recognition, in the understanding that careful, deliberate effort creates something eternal. As we drift further into this imagined night, consider the invisible continuity. These scribes represent their connected generations, preserving knowledge and stories that might have otherwise been lost. Their manuscripts became vessels of memory, bridging time and space, carrying forward insights, prayers, histories, and art. Through their patient labor, they offered us the gift of reflection, the opportunity to engage with centuries-old thought, and the gentle reminder that even the smallest acts of care can ripple outward in ways beyond comprehension. In their work, every quill stroke, every careful alignment of ink, every softened margin reflects the quiet persistence of the human spirit. The world of the scribe invites us to slow down, to breathe, and to observe. It asks us to appreciate the beauty of patience and the grace of endurance. Mistakes, while real, are softened by the larger sweep of dedicated attention. The delicate glow of lantern-lightened parchment reminds us that effort, when guided by care and mindfulness, transforms even the simplest tasks into something sacred. The slow rhythm of work, the meditation of repeated strokes, the harmony of focus Edmonds, and the small joys in marginalia and garden walk Saul, these teach a timeless lesson, that attention, presence, and devotion endure far longer than error or haste. Let the image of the empty scriptorium guide your thoughts now. Desks, once crowded with parchment and ink, stand silent. Quills, once moving with quiet purpose, rest still. Lanterns, once casting warm halos across pages, dim into tender pools of light. The river murmurs faintly, the stones cool beneath starlight, and the air carries the memory of countless patient hands. In this hush, we sense the essence of the scribe's life, resilience, dedication, and quiet triumph. They remind us that the story is not only shaped by battles or rulers, but also by the gentle work of human care, the soft scratch of ink upon a page, and the enduring presence of thought carried forward across time. May their measured rhythm in your mind, a calm echo that invites your own patience and reflection. Let the serenity of candlelight, the hush of cloisters, and the timeless passage of ink guide you gently towards sleep. Imagine the soft warmth of lanterns, the subtle scent of parchment and wax, the faint trickle of the river outside. Hear the whispers of longago quills, the rustle of robes, the faint hum of life in the garden. Let these quiet sounds carry you into dreams, where the slow, deliberate rhythm of the medieval scribe's world blends with your own imagination. In this space, mistakes shrink, fear softens, and devotion endures. The manuscripts, bound and resting, testify to the piety of careful attention and patience. They remind us that even the smallest, quietest efforts hold power, and as you drift further, let the calm legacy of these scribes settle around you, a lullaby of history, care, and enduring craft. In the gentle echo of their labor, may you find comfort, focus, and rest. So as your eyelids grow heavy, picture the scriptorium one last time, the desks bare, the lanterns glowing faintly, the ink pots closed, and the manuscripts waiting in stillness. The scribes have gone to rest, yet their work, their patience, and their devotion remain guiding us, teaching us, whispering through the ages. Let this vision of calm, deliberate, and enduring care guide you into deep sleep, carrying the rhythm of their gentle world into your dreams. Their legacy of ink, patience, and quiet resilience now cradles you, reminding you that in slowing down, observing carefully, and acting with devotion, we too touch eternity in small, beautiful ways. May the soft, deliberate rhythm of the medieval scribe's world guide you now into dreams filled with calm, focus, and enduring wonder.